You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The box at the door. Rain dragged its fingers down the brownstone windows, and the street outside looked like a wet lie told twice. At 4:30, the doorman carried in a heart-shaped chocolate box wrapped in silver paper and tied with a black satin ribbon. No card, no florist's smile, no sender's name, just a parcel with the kind of silence that asks to be opened. It arrived at the Belro house, where people wore manners like gloves and secrets like second skin. Mrs. Lydia Belro, keeper of the household table and all its rituals, set the box in the drawing room, as if it were a guest expected by no one and feared by everyone. Her husband, Arthur Belro, laughed at the mystery. Their daughter Nora stared at it too long. Their son Evan never looked at it at all. By dusk, the box had been opened. By dinner, the chocolates had been shared. By nightfall, Arthur Belro was dead on the library rug, one hand at his throat, the other reaching toward nothing. The doctor said poison before the body cooled. The police said murder before the rain stopped. Then Nero Wolfe was called, and when he heard it began with a heart-shaped box, he closed his eyes as though the city had handed him another riddle with lipstick on it. He was in the office, naturally, installed behind his desk with a book open before him, and no sign that he had read more than 3 lines in the last 10 minutes. The rain tapped the window panes and the room held its usual order. The red leather chair that had shaped itself to him by years of surrender, the globe, the files, the shelves, the smell of books and old wood and the faint, remembered aroma of lunch prepared by Fritz. I was at my own desk with a pencil in my hand and a letter half done for a woman in Cleveland who believed Wolfe could identify a blackmailer from the shape of his commas. The telephone rang. I picked it up. A woman's voice said, "Is this Nero Wolfe's residence?" "It is," Archie Goodwin speaking. "My name is Lydia Belro. I was told Mr. Wolfe sometimes undertakes private investigations of a delicate nature. He does when the nature is delicate enough and the fee can stand upright. What is it?" "My husband is dead." I looked at Wolfe. He had not moved, but I know him. He was listening with every ounce of bulk he owned. "When?" I asked. "Less than an hour ago. The police are here. Inspector Kramer has not arrived. The doctor says poison. There was a box of chocolates." I put a hand over the mouthpiece. "Box of chocolates, poison. Police on scene, Belro House." Wolfe shut the book, which is on his list of violent gestures. "Ask why she is calling me and not the police," I asked. She answered without pause, which meant she had been waiting for the question. "Because the police will arrest the person easiest to arrest. And because if the chocolates were meant for my husband, then someone in this house knew it. I want the truth before scandal makes its own." That was fair enough for Park Avenue or any other place where the carpets are thicker than the loyalties. I asked for the address, told her Mr. Wolfe would consider it, and hung up. Wolfe's eyes were closed. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "If she used the word scandal, the family has money. If she telephoned before Kramer reached the premises, she fears haste. If chocolates were shared and only Belro died, there is either selection or accident, pifui. That covers the whole waterfront." He opened his eyes. "Get Saul Panzer." "I thought you might say that. And call Inspector Kramer. Tell him Mrs. Belro telephoned me. It will save him the trouble of accusing me later of creeping under his fence." That was optimistic. Nothing saves Kramer that trouble. I reached for the phone. Saul was out on a job and unavailable, which was like being told gravity had taken the evening off. Kramer's office said he had already gone downtown. I reported both facts. Wolfe grunted. "Then you will go." I had a feeling my evening was shaping up. "You will observe. You will say nothing gratuitous. You will answer questions sparingly. You will not touch anything edible. That last one hurts." He ignored it. "Find out who opened the box, who first suggested sharing the contents, who selected which pieces, whether the household includes servants beyond the doorman, and who besides the family had access to the drawing room, return at once. And if Kramer objects to my breathing, breathe with restraint. I got my hat and raincoat and was halfway to the hall when he stopped me. Archie, yes. If there is in that house any person who speaks of fate, destiny, or unfortunate coincidence, note it. Such people often lie from laziness. That is the sort of instruction you get from Nero Wolfe, and nowhere else south of the moon. The Belro house stood on East 63rd, a limestone front with polished brass, and a doorman whose face had been trained to reveal nothing and was now failing under pressure. The rain had thinned to a mist. A police car was at the curb, and a knot of people under umbrellas were pretending not to stare. Inside, a plainclothes man in the hall tried to stop me. I gave him my name, and before he could decide whether that was a disease or an occupation, a voice from the drawing room boomed, "Let him in. I know him and regret it." Inspector Kramer was in fine bloom, red in the face and broad in the shoulders. His derby tilted back and his eyes fixed on me with the settled conviction that I had arrived to contaminate evidence. Beside him stood a lean man with a long upper lip and a notebook. I recognized Sergeant Stebbins. On the sofa sat Lydia Belro, straight-backed, pale, handsome, and composed in the way a woman is composed when her nerves have decided to stand on ceremony. Near the mantel, a girl of about 26 was smoking too rapidly to enjoy it. That would be Nora. At the far window, a young man, probably Evan, stared out at the wet street with both hands in his pockets and grief arranged on him like borrowed clothes. Kramer said, "What are you doing here?" calling on a bereaved household. Mrs. Belro telephoned Mr. Wolfe. His head turned. Lydia Belro said, "I did. I do not apologize for it." "No one asked you to." Kramer swung back to me. "Wolfe coming. Number he prefers not to step over policemen when there is room to walk around them." Nora Belro gave a quick sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't ended badly. Kramer glared at her, then at me. "You'll keep your mouth shut. I'll put a padlock on it." He knew I wouldn't, but he also knew he had no legal excuse to throw me out so long as the client wanted me there. He jerked a thumb toward the library. "Look if you want, don't meddle." I went. The library was the right kind of room for a rich man who wanted to appear intimate with books without suffering from them. The shelves were good, the bindings handsome, the chairs deep, the rug thick enough to drown remorse. Arthur Belro was no longer on it. The body had been removed. A chalk mark and dark stain near the desk showed where he had ended his evening. On a side table stood the silver paper and black ribbon, spread beside an empty heart-shaped box. In the box were 3 chocolates left in their paper cups. A man in shirt sleeves, sandy, haired, with careful hands and the deadpan face of a laboratory mind, was examining the box. He glanced up. "Polis Laboratory," he said. "Archie Goodwin, private nuisance." He merely nodded and returned to his work. I took the room by inches. 2 glasses on the desk, one with a little whiskey left in it, one empty, an ashtray holding 1 cigar stub and 2 cigarette butts, a decanter, a small bronze paperweight in the shape of a horse, nothing overturned except a footstool kicked sideways. If Belro had died struggling, he had done it neatly. From the hall came voices, then footsteps. Nora Belro appeared in the doorway. "You are Mr. Goodwin," she said. "That depends who's asking." "I am Nora Belro, Mother called your employer. I wanted to see what one of Nero Wolfe's men looked like." "Disappointing, isn't it?" "Not especially." Her eyes went to the empty chocolate box and away from it. "Do you think someone sent that to kill my father?" "That's a popular theory. It was meant for Mother." I looked at her. "Why?" "She always receives the sentimental things. Flowers, candy, foolish gifts from people who wish to flatter her. Father disliked candy. He said it was a way of making sugar wear evening clothes. That sounds quotable. It sounds like him." She came in 2 steps, then stopped. "I took the first chocolate." "Did you?" "Yes. Then Mother had one. Then I offered the box to Evan. He refused. Father laughed and chose one with a walnut on top. Later at dinner he was quiet. After dinner he went in here for a drink. 20 minutes later Mrs. Krell found him. Who is Mrs. Krell? Our housekeeper. Who opened the box? I did. With what? My fingers. The ribbon slipped loose. It wasn't sealed. Who handed it to you? The doorman brought it in. Mother put it on the table. We all looked at it as if it might announce itself. Did anyone leave the room with it before it was opened? She frowned, thinking. Not that I remember. Mother may have gone to answer the telephone. Evan was in and out. I don't know. That wasn't much, but first statements never are. I asked. How was your father's health? Very good, annoyingly good. He was 58 and acted 40. Business. Belro importing. What does it import? Industrial minerals, specialty chemicals, some metals. I don't know the details. That I stored away. A man handling chemicals does not make poison a casual choice. Voices sounded again from the hall. Nora straightened. That will be Peter. Who is Peter? Peter Dross. He was here for dinner. The name came in with the man. He was tall, dark, smooth, 30 or so, with the kind of face that had never had to wait long for permission. He paused in the doorway when he saw me. Oh, he said, more detectives. Just one, and I'm rationed. Nora said, Peter, this is Archie Goodwin. He works for Nero Wolfe. His brows went up. That seems theatrical. It pays when vaudeville doesn't, I said. He didn't care for me, which saved time. He crossed to Nora and touched her elbow. The police want to speak with me again. Kramer bellowed from the drawing room. Dross. Peter Dross went, with the look of a man asked to answer for weather. I trailed after him and rejoined the company in the drawing room. Kramer was questioning the housekeeper, Mrs. Krell, a broad woman of 50 with a lined face and the manner of one who had seen prosperous families from the pantry side and found them all undercooked. She stated that she had discovered Mr. Belro in the library at 9:10 when she went to ask whether coffee should be served there or in the drawing room. He was on the rug, gasping. She called for help. Dr. Winsett, a neighbor and dinner guest, had examined him and said at once there had been poisoning. Dr. Winsett was present too, a narrow fellow with rimless spectacles and a voice like clean glass. He told it again: severe convulsions, constriction of the throat, rapid collapse. No certainty until analysis, but poison beyond reasonable doubt. I watched faces while he talked. Lydia Belro sat as if each word was a bead. She must count to remain upright. Nora had gone very still. Evan kept wetting his lips. For dinner? Yes. How often do you dine here? I am engaged to Miss Belro. That was news to me, and from Nora's face maybe to half the room. She said sharply, We are not formally engaged. Dross smiled at her without warmth. No, I had failed to notice the distinction. Kramer's eyes brightened. He likes distinctions when they can bleed. Did you eat any of the chocolates? Number, why not? I don't care for them. Did Mr. Belro? He said he didn't, then took one. He was in a cheerful mood. You and he had no quarrel? None. I filed that beside the rest. There are men who say none the way others say several. When Kramer swung toward Evan, the sun left the window and came reluctantly to a chair. He was about 24, blond in a tired way, and had a face that might have been pleasant if it were inhabited. Kramer asked the same questions. Evan answered flatly. Yes, he had seen the box arrive. No, he had not touched it. No, he had not liked his father much. Yes, his father knew that. No, that was not unusual between them. He had been in business with his father for 18 months, hated it, and had lately made no secret of wanting out. Lydia Belro said, Evan. He didn't look at her. It's true, Kramer said, wanting out enough to murder him. Evan's head turned then, and for the first time there was life in him. If I had wanted him dead, I'd have chosen something less theatrical than candy. There was a silence. Kramer's face got another shade darker. I thought, brother, you are either a fool or very tired. Into that silence a maid came with a tray of coffee, and found herself facing a room full of people who regarded cups as if they might contain confessions. She retreated. I moved near Lydia Belrow. "Mrs. Belrow, may I ask about the package?" Kramer growled. "Number." She ignored him. "Yes, of course. Did you expect candy from anyone?" "Number, any admirer?" She looked at me with cool surprise. "Mr. Goodwin, I am 52. Age has never stopped foolish men. Nor women for that matter," she said. "Number nothing of that sort. Any enemy of your husband fond of symbols?" My husband had business rivals, not melodramatists. That might have been true, but she said it too quickly. Before I could press, the bell in the hall rang and a patrolman admitted 2 more men, one from the medical examiner's office and another from the police laboratory. The room stirred. Kramer seized the opportunity to herd me aside. "Listen," he muttered, "if Wolfe puts one toe in this, you'll do what you always do, inspect him loudly and then take his answer." He leaned closer. "There's something wrong here. 3 people ate from that box and 1 dies. Either one piece was poisoned or something else finished him. I don't need Wolfe muddying it. That's a touching declaration from a man standing knee deep." His jaw shifted. "Get out. Mrs. Belrow asked me here." "I'm asking you gone." Before I could answer, the sandy-haired lab man emerged from the library and addressed Kramer. "Inspector, preliminary only. There is residue on one of the remaining chocolates and in the paper cup where a missing piece had rested. Strong, bitter, almond odor when crushed. Cyanide," Kramer snapped. "Possibly a cyanogenic compound. I won't swear yet." Nora made a small sound. Lydia Belrow shut her eyes. Evan stared at the man as if he had spoken in code. Peter Dross asked, "Then only 1 piece?" The lab man shrugged. "So far. That changed the room before. The box had been a shared danger. Now it was a selection. Somebody had not poisoned candy. Somebody had chosen Arthur Belrow's candy." I was reaching for the phone in the hall before Kramer could forbid it. He followed, but I was quicker. "I got Wolfe." "Yes," he said. "Selection, not wholesale. 3-8 Belrow died. Lab thinks 1 poisoned piece. Maybe cyanide. Daughter opened the box. Mother ate 1. Son refused. Dinner guest present. Male, possibly engaged to daughter, says he doesn't care for candy. Son disliked father openly. Family, money, and nerves. Housekeeper found body in library after dinner. Belrow imported chemicals." "Imported what chemicals?" "That's what the daughter said. Specialty chemicals, minerals, metals." A pause. "Did Belrow choose his chocolate or was it given him?" "He chose it himself, according to the daughter. Walnut on top." "Ah," Wolfe exhaled. "And the others?" "No one has told me what they chose." "Then also ask whether the poisoned piece was visibly distinct. A murderer who trusts to chance is contemptible. A murderer who relies on preference may be intelligent. Return as soon as you have that." Kramer was 2 feet away and hearing enough to sour milk. I hung up. "Well," he demanded. "Wolfe says you should avoid chance and contempt. He told me what I could do with Wolfe and went back to the drawing room. I followed because I am brave in small installments. I got my chance with Nora first. Which pieces did you and your mother take?" She blinked. "Mine had a cherry cream. Mother's was plain dark chocolate." "And your father's walnut?" "Yes, he always took nuts when he took candy at all." "Always?" She hesitated. "Usually." Lydia Belrow heard it. "Always," she said firmly. "He liked walnuts." That was too firm. I looked at her, but she gave me nothing except a lifted chin. Then I crossed to the empty box and studied the map of the remaining pieces. Heart-shaped boxes are democratic on the surface and treacherous underneath. The paper cups had been shifted. 1 cup held a dark chocolate left untouched. Another held a caramel-looking piece. A third had some flaked coconut. 1 empty cup showed a smear of cream. Another, maybe, a trace of nut. Hard to tell. But if the sender knew Arthur Belrow would choose walnuts, Then the black ribbon had tied itself around one man's throat before he ever loosened it. Kramer was on the telephone now, barking for a list of deliveries, messenger services, neighborhood florists and confectioners. Good. That meant he hadn't yet decided the family could cook its own poison. He would, though. Kramer is a good cop because he suspects everyone in widening circles. Mrs. Krell passed near me. I stopped her. Who set the chocolates out for dinner? They weren't set out for dinner, she said. They were tasted in the drawing room before, just as a notion. Whose notion? Her mouth pinched. Miss Nora opened them. Mr. Belro laughed. Mrs. Belro, said one. Each would not spoil appetites. Then she told me to take them away till after dinner, and I did. I felt a small click somewhere behind my forehead. You took the box away? Yes, to the pantry. Who had it then? I did. For how long? 10 minutes, maybe. Then Mrs. Belro rang and said, bring them back. Mr. Belro wanted another look because he claimed the walnut one had escaped him. Did it? I don't know. Who was in the pantry? Only me. Then Clara Dean, the second maid, for plates. Then Mr. Evan came in for ice. That was more like it. A box at the door, then a procession. Opportunity had been bred like rabbits. I caught Kramer's eye and told him. He swore softly and hauled Mrs. Krell off for a fuller statement. While he did that, I took one long last look at the Belros. Lydia Belro, hands folded too carefully. Nora, with her cigarette gone dead between her fingers. Evan standing apart, his face blank again. Peter Dross smooth as polished stone, watching all of them and offering nothing. There are houses where grief fills the room. Here, something else had got there first and taken the better chair. I left before Kramer could remember another order. The rain had stopped, and the city was shining in the street lamps with that washed, false innocence New York wears after weather, as if no one inside it had ever poisoned anybody. Back at the brownstone, Fritz admitted me with an expression suggesting he disapproved of murder because it delayed supper. Wolfe was in the office, of course, seated exactly as if he had not moved since I left, which was impossible because from the kitchen drifted proof that he had already supervised, criticized, and consumed a meal. Well, he said, I gave it to him in order, all of it, while he sat, with eyes half closed and fingertips together. He interrupted only twice, once to ask the exact phrasing of Evan's remark about theatrics, and once to ask whether Lydia Belro had said the poisoned box was meant for her or had merely allowed others to say so. When I finished, he grunted. The pantry interval, he said. Important, but possibly too obvious. The son's candor may be stupidity or strategy. The dinner guest is polished. Such men may hide a great deal or nothing at all. The wife interests me. She is either truthful or highly trained. I noticed that myself, being one of the brighter boys. He ignored it. And Belro imported chemicals. Poi, that fact will intoxicate Kramer. He will expect poison to breed naturally in the household accounts. Sometimes it does. Want me back there tonight? Number that surprised me. No. Number Kramer now bristles. He will telephone by 11, either to insult me or ask a question he resents, needing answered. Before then I shall think. Tomorrow you will obtain the list of purchases in that box, if there was one, and learn everything about Arthur Belro, his business, his family, and the young man Dross. Also discover whether any person sent Lydia Belro candy in the recent past. Nothing else. He opened his eyes. Archie, a heart-shaped box appears at a house containing a husband, a wife, a daughter, a son, and a guest tied to the daughter. 3 persons eat safely. One man takes a walnut and dies. During the interval between tasting and death, the box goes to the pantry. The wife fears scandal more than arrest. There is much else. I nodded. When you put it that way, it does begin to look crowded. It is crowded. Therefore, one fact, when found, will compel the others to stand in line. He reached for the book he had abandoned. Go to bed. You have a long morning. I started for the hall, then turned. What fact? He looked at me with mild disgust. The one the murderer thinks hidden. That is what I get for living with a genius. Upstairs in my room, I sat at the window a while before turning in. West 35th Street lay damp and quiet below, with taxis whispering past, and the lights of the city making their own promises to the dark. Somewhere downtown, a man was dead because he had chosen a chocolate with a walnut on top. Unless he hadn't chosen it at all and someone wanted us to think he had. Somewhere a woman who spoke beautifully of truth had already lied to Nero Wolfe. Somewhere a son who hated theatrics had given the evening its best line. And somewhere, perhaps nearest of all, was the little fact Wolfe had mentioned. The one the murderer believed tucked safely away, like the black ribbon in silver paper. I had a notion we would not sleep much before we found it. Chapter 2. A house full of locked faces. The Belro house stood on a street where old money leaned behind iron fences and every window looked as if it knew better than to speak. Wolfe did not visit lightly, and on that morning he declined to begin. Miriam Belro, the dead man's sister, had telephoned before breakfast, in a voice dry enough to strike sparks, to say that if Nero Wolfe expected cooperation, he would have to take the family seriously, and at once. Wolfe took her seriously and sent me. That is one of the ways genius economizes. I got there at 10:30 after Wolfe had spent his proper 2 hours with the orchids, and a most improper 10 minutes telling me that families with money never merely grieve. They also revise. The rain was gone, and the house looked scrubbed and composed and entirely unwilling to remember that 12 hours earlier a man had died on its library rug. The butler admitted me this time. I hadn't seen him the night before, because he had been upstairs with one of those household ailments that always arrive at the right moment. His name was Pearlie Ames, and he was a butler the way the Constitution is a document, formal, durable, and not to be argued with. He took my coat, as if doing me a favor I had not earned, and informed me that Mrs. Belro, Miss Belro, Mr. Evan Belro, and Miss Miriam Belro were waiting in the drawing room. When I entered, they were arranged there exactly as a playwright with an inferiority complex might have placed them. Lydia Belro sat straight as a courtroom oath, hands folded, grey dress without a wrinkle, and face without a concession. Nora Belro held a teacup she did not drink from. Evan Belro had got himself into a chair at an angle that announced indifference too carefully to be trusted. Miriam Belro, whom I had not yet met, stood by the mantel and watched the others with the chill attention of a woman who had spent years learning the weight of inheritance and the price of affection. She was perhaps 55, lean and handsome in a severe way, with Arthur Belro's brow and none of his warmth, if he had possessed any. Her black dress had not been chosen for mourning. It had been chosen because black obeyed her, she said. You are Mr. Goodwin. My brother was murdered, and your employer sends a younger man with a flexible neck. I bend only when useful. That is already more than can be said for most Belros, she returned. Nora's lips twitched. Lydia did not approve of that. She said, Mr. Goodwin, I hope Mr. Wolfe understands that we wish discretion. Madam, discretion is one of our standard failures, but we do our best, Evan said. I told you he'd talk like that. Miriam swung her gaze to him. And you talk like a boy who believes insolence is camouflage. That one landed. Evan's jaw shifted. I took a chair I hadn't been offered and got out my notebook, which always improves company. Mr. Wolfe wants facts, I said. He can get emotions retail from the newspapers. Let's start with the box, Miriam said. Quite, Lydia said. As I told the police, the package was brought in shortly before 6. By whom? The doorman received it from a messenger. Clara Dean, the second maid, brought it to the drawing room and placed it on the central table. Who was present? All of us except my husband, briefly, Lydia said. I was there, Nora, Evan. Miriam had just arrived. My husband came in moments later. Miriam corrected her. Arthur was in the room when the ribbon was untied. Lydia turned her head a fraction. If you say so. That tiny exchange was worth a paragraph of testimony, I said. Who opened it? Lydia answered at once. I did. Nora lowered the teacup. Number? I loosened the ribbon. Mother lifted the lid. Lydia did not look at her daughter. The distinction seems microscopic. Not to a policeman, I said, or to Wolfe. Miriam came over and sat. The custom in this house, she said, such as it was, had always been that gifts arriving near supper were opened by Lydia. Arthur liked little ceremonies. He liked the appearance of a household. Did he like chocolates? No, said Evan. Yes, said Lydia. Nora looked from one to the other. Sometimes. That made 3 answers in one breath. I wrote them all down. Which is it? I asked. Miriam said. He liked control. If chocolates were present, he liked choosing first even when claiming not to care. That sounds closer, I said. Now then, who took pieces? Lydia drew a breath. I took one, Nora took one, Miriam took one, Arthur took 2. That gave me a new arrangement. The night before I had heard otherwise from Nora and Mrs. Krell. I kept my face smooth and asked, 2? Yes. Both at once. 1 before dinner, Lydia said, and 1 after the box was brought back. Why was it brought back? Miriam answered. Because Arthur decided he had been hasty and wanted another look. Nora put the teacup down hard enough to click. That is not what happened. 3 faces turned to her, she said. Father didn't ask for another look. Mother sent Mrs. Krell to fetch the box after dinner because Aunt Miriam said the shapes were ugly. Miriam gave her a long glance. You remember nonsense vividly. I remember the room vividly and revise it eagerly, Lydia said. There it was again, not grief, not fear, but revision. Wolfe had called it before I left the brownstone, and the family was doing him proud. I said mildly, let's not quarrel over ugliness yet. Let's settle the line-up, Mrs. Belrow. What piece did you take? A plain dark chocolate. Nora? A cherry cream. Miriam? A caramel. Arthur, Lydia's eyes moved once, almost imperceptibly, to Miriam, a walnut. And the second, no one answered for a second, too long. Then Evan said, if he took 2, one of them was the walnut. That's the important part, isn't it? Important to whom? I asked. To the man who wants to know how my father got killed without the rest of us so much as burping. He had a point, and delivered it badly. I let him keep both. At that moment, Pearlie Ames materialized to announce that Inspector Kramer had already been and gone, and Sergeant Stebbins might return. That was Butler for. The police are not finished, and neither are you. Good, I said. Then we can have the servants. Pearlie looked as if servants were not things one could have even temporarily. But he withdrew. Miriam said, You are very calm, Mr. Goodwin. I bill extra for panic. She regarded me. Do you think one of us killed Arthur? I think one of this house's faces is locked from the inside. Evan snorted. Nora stared at me as if trying to decide whether I was impertinent or useful. Lydia went colder by a degree. The doorman came first. His name was Harris, a broad man with a patient expression and the hands of one who could have broken up fights for a living and now opened doors instead. He confirmed that a messenger in a dark cap had delivered the package shortly before 6, signed no book, and spoke only to say, For Mrs. Belrow. Harris had thought nothing of it, because expensive houses receive unexplained luxuries, the way poorer ones receive circulars. What sort of messenger? I asked. Young fellow, maybe 20. Coat too large for him, cap low. I couldn't tell much. White-colored, white, I think, couldn't swear. Did he come on foot? Yes. Carry anything else? Numbered. Did you keep the wrapping? That was taken by the police. Of course it was. Kramer may bark, but he picks up string. Clara Dean was next. The maid, a trim brunette with red hands and eyes that had not yet learned how to disguise curiosity. She had placed the package on the central table in the drawing room. She had seen Mrs. Belrow open it, or partly seen it. There had been talk. She had then been sent for more tea things and had returned to find the box already open and the first chocolates chosen. Who chose first? I asked. She frowned. Mr. Belro was reaching. Miss Nora had one in her fingers. Mrs. Belro had one too. Miss Miriam. She was laughing at something. Mr. Evan? Didn't take any. That held with last night. Good. One person in the house might yet be innocent of rearranging furniture in memory. Mrs. Krell was brought in next, and if any housekeeper ever deserved a witness chair, she did. I asked about the pantry interval and watched the family from the edge of my sight while she answered. Yes, sir, she said. I took the box away before dinner because Mrs. Belro said sweets before soup were barbarous. I put it in the pantry on the side shelf. How long was it there? About 15 minutes. Who entered the pantry? She pursed her lips. Hilda for plates, Mr. Evan for ice. Miss Nora came to ask if the coffee service was polished. Mr. Dross stepped in once from the back hall because he said he'd lost his cigarettes. That improved the field nicely. Last night she had mentioned Evan and Hilda. This morning, Nora and Dross had joined the parade. Did anyone touch the box? I asked. I didn't see them do it. I wasn't staring at the thing every second. Did you leave the pantry? For half a minute to tell cook the consomme was ready, so the box was alone. With whoever was there, yes. Lydia said sharply, Mrs. Krell, must you make it sound careless? Mrs. Krell turned to her employer with admirable composure. Madam, if I made this house sound careless, it is because last evening it was. Nobody thanked her. I nearly did. After she left, I looked at the family and said, interesting. Miriam said, not especially, merely unfortunate. No, I told her. Unfortunate is rain on a garden party. This is opportunity with silver paper. That settled nowhere pleasantly. Evan got up and walked to the window. Nora asked if I wanted the dinner guest. Peter Dross. I told her yes, but before Pearlie could fetch him, I asked the question Wolfe had underlined for me. Who knew Arthur Belro always chose walnuts? Again the silence. Then Miriam said, all of us. Nora nodded. Yes, Lydia said, naturally. Evan, still at the window, said, he didn't always. He chose them when he wanted to make a point of being predictable. I turned that over. A point to whom? To himself, Evan said. He liked proving that people notice habits and then use them. He'd change them just to keep the upper hand. Well, that is cheerful, I said. Miriam's eyes narrowed. You see, this is why I wanted Mr. Wolfe. The police will pounce on the obvious thing and miss the family talent for complication. She might have been right, but I didn't intend to grant her too much. People who criticize police vision often hope to direct it. Peter Dross came in looking expensive and rested, which meant either a good conscience or a superior tailor. He greeted the women, ignored Evan, and gave me a look suggesting he resented being questioned by employees. Mr. Dross, I said, you were here for dinner. Start at the package. I saw it on the table when I arrived. Open. Yes. Did you take a chocolate? Number. Why not? I don't like them. You said that last night. I admire consistency. Did Arthur Belro take one in your presence? He did. One or two? One then. Another later, I believe. Believe. I was not cataloguing his desserts, Nora said. Peter. He spread his hands. What? Must every detail wear handcuffs? Sometimes it helps, I said. Did you go into the pantry? He paused a fraction. That was enough. Briefly. For cigarettes? Yes. Loathes them often. Only in houses not my own. See the box there. I may have. I wasn't interested in chocolates, but you noticed them enough to remember not being interested. His face cooled. Mr. Goodwin, are you suggesting I poisoned Arthur Belro? Number, I'm suggesting the pantry was as crowded as a subway platform and half as trustworthy. Nora got up then, setting the room alight by movement alone. This is useless. Everyone keeps changing it. Father took one chocolate before dinner. Mother took one. Aunt Miriam took one. I took one. The box went away. It came back. Later, Father had another in the library with his whiskey. That is what matters. I swung to her. In the library? Yes. Who brought it to him there? No answer, Miriam said slowly. I had understood he carried it himself, Mrs. Belrose said. Number Mrs. Krell put it on the desk with the coffee tray. That was new again. I stood up. Excuse me, I found Mrs. Krell in the pantry, issuing stern instructions to a pan that had offended her. When I asked, she said yes. After dinner she had taken coffee to the library, and the chocolate box had gone too, because Mrs. Belrose said Mr. Belrose liked sweet things after all when there was a drink beside them. She had set the box on the desk and left. Arthur had been alive then. He had spoken to Dr. Winsett through the door a few minutes later. When she next saw him, he was on the rug. There are moments when a room rearranges itself in your head. This was one back in the drawing room I did not sit. Arthur Belrose had one chocolate before dinner with witnesses. He may have had another after dinner in the library, with fewer witnesses. The box was in the pantry in between, and later on the desk in the library. That gives us 2 opportunities, and 1 dead man. Miriam said. Yes, that is why you are here. No, I told her. I'm here because none of you can tell the same story twice. Lydia rose then, graceful as a drawn rapier. Mr. Goodwin, my husband died last night. If our recollections differ, perhaps grief is to blame. It could be. But grief usually blurs. It doesn't edit. She looked at me long enough to let me know I had crossed a line, and then said, You will tell Mr. Wolfe that if he wishes our continued cooperation, he must come himself. That was grand. It also meant pressure, and people exert pressure when they are afraid the wrong person is thinking. I smiled. I'll tell him, he'll hate it. On my way out, Evan followed me into the hall. Goodwin. Yes. He shoved his hands in his pockets and stared at the floorboards. I didn't poison him. That was not the first thing I asked. I know, but it's the one everyone's thinking. Are they? Yes. He lifted his head. And if you tell Wolfe something, tell him this. My father trusted Aunt Miriam more than anyone in the house, which is why he shouldn't. Before I could answer, he walked off. That was a pleasant little gift to carry home. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, enthroned and irritable, which meant the orchids had not consoled him enough. I reported in full. He listened with his eyes shut, only once lifting a hand to stop me and make me repeat the exact sequence of the box. Opened in the drawing room, sent to the pantry, returned, later taken to the library with coffee. When I finished, he opened his eyes. Good, he said. Good, the family is a hall of mirrors. The servants remember more entrances than Grand Central, and the dead man may have eaten either one poisoned walnut before dinner or another after dinner. Yes, good. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Because now we know the first certainty. I wait in gratitude. The poison was not meant for the room. It was meant for Arthur Belrose at a chosen moment. Therefore the heart-shaped box was camouflage, not method. I frowned. Then the poisoned walnut may have been added after the box arrived, or substituted, or reserved. In any case, the family's contradiction about who ate what is not confusion alone. It is defense. They are not yet protecting the murderer, Archie. They are protecting themselves from exposure to one another. That is warmer than I like my households. It should be. Also, the sister interests me, and the wife, and the son, and the daughter, and the polished ass dross. I'm glad you're narrowing it down. He ignored that. Tomorrow you will learn who profits by Arthur Belrose's death, what his will provides, why the sister insisted, and what business concern required imported chemicals. Also, whether Dr. Winsett truly heard Belrose speak after the box reached the library. Anything else? Yes, Wolfe picked up a sheet from his desk. Saul Panzer has reported. Peter Dross is in debt. I grinned. Now the locked faces begin to look rented. Wolfe grunted. Do not be frivolous. Debt is merely appetite with arithmetic. but it will do for a start. And it would. In that house full of locked faces, somebody had begun to rattle the keys. Chapter 3. The harmless heart Inspector Kramer brought the box himself, which proved either devotion to duty or a shortage of subordinates willing to be insulted in person. He arrived a little after 11, carrying the heart-shaped chocolate box under one arm, as if it were evidence against civilization. The silver wrapping and black ribbon were in a paper envelope. His face had the settled expression of a man who expected answers from objects and resented getting them from Nero Wolfe instead. Fritz admitted him with the look he reserves for policemen, tax notices, and inferior mushrooms. I was in the office at my desk, busy making order out of the Belro tangle and not enjoying the labor. Wolfe sat behind his own desk, installed in the red leather chair, like a monument to intelligent refusal. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke. Leather bindings and orchids filtering down from the plant rooms above, where for 2 hours every day Wolfe permitted heaven to exist on a trial basis. Kramer came in without ceremony, put the box on Wolfe's desk and said, "There, you wanted it. Don't say I never cooperate." Wolfe looked at it without touching it. "I rarely say anything of the kind." "You should. It would improve your manners." "That would be a misfortune." Wolfe glanced at the paper envelope. "And the wrappings?" Kramer dropped them beside the box. "Also there, tested already." I leaned back and gave him a bright look. "Morning, Inspector. You're improving. Most men don't bring us candy till after the funeral." He ignored me, which always disappoints me because he does it with effort. The laboratory has gone over the lot. The box, the ribbon, the paper, the remaining chocolates, the liners, the paper cups, every crumb and smudge. No poison on any of it. Wolfe's eyes lifted. "None? None?" Kramer planted his fists on the desk edge and glared at the box as though it had wasted public funds by being decorative. "No cyanide, no arsenic, no strychnine, no alkaloid residue, no powder in the folds, no tampering with the cardboard partitions, no trace in the satin lining. If Belro died from poison, it didn't come from the damned sweets." I sat up straighter. "That's a reversal." "No," Kramer snapped. "It's a headache." Wolfe extended a finger and rotated the box a quarter turn. He still did not touch it more than necessary, and the victim unquestionably ate from it. "So they say." "They say many things," Wolfe murmured. Kramer's jaw shoved forward. "Belro was seen taking chocolates from that box. One witness says 1 piece before dinner and 1 later. Another says 2 before dinner. Another says 1 before and another in the library after dinner. They disagree on nearly everything except that Belro handled the box and died." "That is enough," Wolfe said softly. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Now and then, when Wolfe closes his eyes, the room seems to shift around him. It is not a trick and not a pose. It is merely that he grows still in a way that makes other people's movements look guilty. Kramer hates it. I enjoy it because I don't have to do anything except wait for intelligence to happen. It did. "The murderer," Wolfe said, "did not send death in the box. The murderer sent behavior." Kramer blinked. I grinned. "Meaning?" Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me, not at Kramer, which improved the atmosphere for me if not for law enforcement. "Meaning expectation," he said. "Tradition, habit. A respectable household is ruled less by affection than by rehearsal. Someone knew a heart-shaped chocolate box sent to that house would be opened in a particular way, by a particular person, and passed according to a custom already established. Someone also knew Arthur Belro's relation to such a box. Greed, I suggested. Number privilege." Wolfe settled deeper into the chair. "A man may declare chocolates frivolous, feminine, childish, or vulgar. If he is head of the house, he may nevertheless insist on choosing first, or on choosing twice, especially if the package is nominally for his wife." Kramer snorted. "No," Wolfe said, "it is domestic mechanics." I said, "You're saying the box wasn't the weapon, it was a stage direction." Wolfe inclined his head. "Yes." Kramer stared at him. "Belro died of poison, did he?" Wolfe asked mildly. Kramer went red. The doctor said poison before analysis. A police laboratory man smelled bitter almonds in one crushed residue and spoke of a possible cyanogenic compound. Today the laboratory finds no poison in the box or chocolates. Therefore, either the poison was elsewhere, or the smell deceived him, or the poisoned piece vanished entirely and left no trace in what remains. That last part is possible, Kramer said grudgingly. If there was one loaded piece and he ate it. Possible. Yes, but then we must ask why no trace remained in the cup it sat in, or on the box, unless it was inserted and removed with some care, or was never in the box at all except for appearance. Kramer's face altered a little. That is as close as he gets to thoughtful, without paying admission. I got up and went to the desk for a better look. The box sat open, mild and absurd and innocent as a valentine in a church pew. The satin lining had a pearly sheen, the cardboard partitions were cream, colored, and the paper cups held the surviving chocolates with all the useless respectability in the world. The black ribbon lay beside it like a widow too pretty to trust. Harmless heart, I said. Nothing is harmless in a house organized around ritual, Wolfe muttered. Kramer looked at me. You find out anything useful this morning? I find out Belrose remember selectively. The box was opened by either Lydia or Nora, or both. Miriam Belrose says Arthur was in the room at the ribbon. Lydia says he may not have been. Mrs. Krell says the box went to the pantry before dinner. Then it came back. Then after dinner it went to the library with coffee. Peter Dross was in the pantry looking for cigarettes. Evan was there for ice. Nora came in about the coffee service. Hilda the maid was in and out. Mrs. Krell left it unattended briefly. And Arthur Belrose may have eaten one piece before dinner and one in the library later. Kramer grunted. I know all that. Yes, I said cheerfully, but I tell it better. He gave me a look one notch above manslaughter. Wolfe ignored both of us and said, What of the victim's will? Kramer shifted. Haven't got it yet. I see. Don't start. Wolfe spread a hand. I had not intended to describe the usual speed of police effort. Kramer turned to me. What did Belrose's son tell you? That his father trusted Miriam more than anyone in the house, which is why he shouldn't. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Did he say why? Number he'd already used up his courage for the day. Kramer made a sound that could have meant many things. Miriam Belrose says the opposite. Says Evan was the problem child. Nora the favorite, the wife dignified, and Arthur a hard man but not an unfair one. I never met a family where the adjectives lined up. That is because adjectives are knives, Wolfe said. Facts, Inspector. Fact, Dross owes money. Fact, Evan hated working for his father. Fact, Lydia knew the household customs and insists on discretion. Fact, Miriam wants you on the case, which by itself annoys me. Fact, the dead man ran Belrose Importing, which deals in chemical shipments, among other things. Fact, the Dr. Winsett says Belrose spoke to him through the library door after the coffee tray went in and sounded normal. That, I said, is new. Kramer nodded. Winsett had forgotten to mention it last night in the excitement. Remembered this morning, said he stopped by the library door on his way to wash up and said something about a bridge hand after dinner. Belrose answered from inside. Latter, doctor, I'm occupied. 2 minutes maybe, no more, before he collapsed. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Precisely how long before discovery? Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 12. I looked from one to the other. So if the poison, or whatever, acted fast, it had to be taken after the doctor spoke. Or not be poison, Wolfe said. Kramer slapped the desk with his palm. He died choking. That does not narrow mortality as much as you think. Kramer sucked air through his nose and let it out hard. All right, tell me the trick then. There is no trick yet. Wolfe's gaze went to the box again. Merely a correction. The heart-shaped box is not innocent, but neither is it the simple container of a poisoned chocolate. It is a social instrument. It caused persons to touch, pass, choose, observe, remember, and now lie. That is its utility, I said. You sound affectionate. I am never affectionate toward cardboard. The doorbell rang then. Fritz's steps passed in the hall, and a moment later, Saul Panzer entered without drama, which is his hallmark. Saul always looks as if he belongs wherever he is standing, which is one reason he is worth what Wolfe pays him, and perhaps a little more. He handed me a folded sheet, nodded to Kramer, and took a chair. Wolfe said, "Report." Saul looked at his notes. Peter Dross is 32, no profession worth naming, a gentleman investor according to himself, but he mostly speculates and loses, owes money in several directions, has been seen often with Miss Belro the past 6 months. There was talk 2 years ago of an engagement to a widow in Westchester that ended when her money proved tied up harder than expected. I whistled softly. Romantic. Saul went on. Arthur Belro opposed him, said so to at least 3 people. One of them was Belro's attorney, Julian Haft. Kramer said, "You talked to Haft?" Saul looked at him, briefly. Kramer glowered at Wolfe. "You see, he snoops where I'm supposed to snoop." "Then snoop faster," I suggested. Kramer ignored that because he had the habit of survival. Saul continued. Belro had recently altered something in his business structure. Don't know what yet. Also, his sister Miriam received an allowance from a trust originally set up by their father. That trust terminates on Arthur Belro's death and converts to a direct distribution between Miriam and the children. That changed the heir by a measurable ounce. Meaning, I said, Miriam gets freer money now. Saul nodded once. Probably. Kramer swore under his breath. Wolfe steepled his fingers. And the widow? Saul glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. No evidence yet of a large direct benefit beyond the estate. But if Belro had changed his will recently, that matters. Wolfe grunted. Yes. Kramer shoved himself away from the desk and began pacing, which in our office is dramatic because there isn't much room and Wolfe disapproves of locomotion. I've got a son who hated the victim, a fortune hunter in debt, a sister with a changed trust, and a wife who wants secrecy more than sleep. And a daughter, I said. Kramer stopped. What about her? Nothing yet. That's why I mention her. The ones people omit have a habit of stepping on the third act. Wolfe gave me a brief glance that might almost have been approval if you are willing to live on crumbs. Kramer took off his hat, put it back on, and asked Wolfe, "All right, if the box only sent behavior, what killed Belro?" Wolfe closed his eyes again. "I do not know." Kramer barked a laugh that had no mirth. At last. "But I know this, the murderer relied on custom. The customs at issue are not only who opens gifts and who chooses nuts. There is also the matter of what follows dinner in that house. Coffee, perhaps liqueurs, cards, a man retiring briefly to his library, a tray sent after him, family members moving. According to habit rather than scrutiny, somewhere inside one of those rehearsed actions lies the murder," I said. "So, now we inventory the habits?" "Yes." Wolfe opened his eyes. "You will do so," Kramer said sourly, "and I suppose I'm to stand by and admire. You may assist if you can manage it without noise." That was enough to blow him into a flare. "Listen, Wolfe. This is my case. Indeed, then solve it." They looked at one another in the old style, one standing broad and furious, the other seated and immovable. I have seen it often, and never entirely stop enjoying it. Finally, Kramer jerked a finger at the box. "You keep it till afternoon. I want it back." "Of course. And if you find out anything solid, you tell me." "Possibly." Kramer glared, turned, and marched out. Fritz in the hall received his departure as if a draft had been corrected. When the front door had closed, I said, "Pleasant man." Wolfe snorted. "Archie, write this down. We require 1. The exact will provisions and trust structure. 2. The precise sequence of after-dinner service at the Belro house on the fatal evening. 3. A list of every person who entered the pantry, drawing room, library and hall between arrival of the box and Belro's collapse. 4. Arthur Belro's habits concerning chocolates, coffee, whiskey, and after-dinner privacy. 5. Dr. Winsett's exact account, including the time and content of Belro's last words. I picked up my notebook. Done. Also, Wolfe added, find whether the box came from a real confectioner or was merely a purchased container. The wrapping may be more truthful than the contents. Saul rose. I'll take the stores. Wolfe nodded. Saul went. I said, anything for me besides the Belros and the doctor and the lawyer and the butler and the city. Yes, bring me the phrase used by Lydia Belro when she insisted on discretion. That exact. Yes, people reveal themselves less by nouns than by the arrangement of their contempt. That is the kind of sentence that makes me consider simpler employment. At lunch Fritz produced veal in cream with mushrooms. So exact, it might have restored faith in human intention if we had not been dealing with Belros. Wolfe ate with the concentration of a saint performing a private rite. I reported only once, to say that if he meant to inspect the box further, he had better do it before Fritz's sauce seduced him into indifference. Apfoy, he said. Nothing seduces me into indifference except idiocy. After lunch he did inspect it, though inspect is not the word. He sat with the box before him and studied it as if it had once lied in another language and he intended to catch the accent. He examined the seams, the satin lining, the paper cups, the pressure marks in the cardboard where pieces had rested, the black ribbon for traces of being retied by awkward hands, the silver paper for folds inconsistent with ordinary wrapping. He used a lens, a strong lamp, and his eyes. I watched because there was no better show in town. At one point he said, Archie, look here. I came around. He pointed to the underside of the lid, just inside the edge. See the faint abrasion. I bent maybe, not maybe. There, a slight roughness where a label might have been removed. Store label, possibly, or a printed insert. Kramer's men may have scraped it inadvertently, or someone removed it before delivery, which would help hide where the box came from. Yes, but not why. He leaned back. The sender, or arranger, wanted the object recognized as a gift, not traced as a purchase. That is not surprising. The phone rang. I took it. It was Dr. Winsett, returning my earlier message. I put him through on the extension and listened. Wolfe said, Doctor, I require accuracy, not confidence. At what hour did you speak with Mr. Belro through the library door? A pause. Then Wolfe again. No approximations. Look at your watch if you remember doing so. Yes, yes. Very well. And his voice? Normal, forced, breathless, irritated. I see. What were his exact words? Good. And when Mrs. Krell called you, how long after that? 4 minutes. Not 10. Excellent. No, not excellent. Merely useful. He hung up and looked at me. Well. Winsett checked his memory against the bridge scorecard in his pocket. He spoke to Belro at 9:06. Belro replied, Later, doctor. I'm taking my medicine. Mrs. Krell called him at 9:10. I stared. Medicine? Yes. That wasn't in any of the previous versions. Indeed. Did Belro take medicine regularly? We do not know. I grinned slowly. But somebody did. Wolfe's eyes half closed. The harmless heart. A house full of locked faces. And now a dead man taking medicine no one has yet mentioned. The case improves. It would, if I liked, improvement. You like salary? Go earn it. I got my coat. At the door he stopped me. Archie. Yes? If Belro did take medicine regularly, discover where he kept it, and who knew of it. If he did not, discover why he chose that phrase. A dying man may lie, but unless he is theatrical, he lies for a reason. I thought Evan handled theatrics. Everyone in that house handles them. One person, however, has stage management. That sent me out onto the street with the afternoon wind sharp off the avenue and the city moving briskly under a pale sky. Somewhere beyond the taxis and horns and wet curb shine was a brownstone on Riddle Street where a heart-shaped chocolate box had entered like a valentine and left like a summons. It had carried no poison, only a script. Arthur Belro had played his scene, taken something he called medicine, and died 4 minutes later. Now all I had to do was find out who had written the line. That is the sort of assignment that keeps a man from honest work. Chapter 4. Who opens first? I went back to the Belro house that afternoon with a fresh notebook, a stale disposition, and the firm intention of learning how people perform little ceremonies when they think nobody is measuring the steps. Wolfe had sent me with instructions simple enough to fit on a matchbook and nasty enough to occupy a district attorney. Find out who opens first, who waits, who watches, and who profits by knowing it. The Belros were old-fashioned in the way ivy is old-fashioned, ornamental until it begins choking brick. Their customs were not written down anywhere, but they were enforced with more vigor than most city ordinances. Every feast, every anniversary parcel, every florist's box, every ceremonial gift entered the house through Lydia Belro's hands first. She prided herself on it, though she had not yet used that word. She would, people always do when a habit hardens into vanity. This time Pearly Ames admitted me with a look suggesting he had already decided I would lower the tone of the carpets. He said Mrs. Belro was in the morning room and asked whether I would take tea. I told him yes, because a man should never refuse tea in a house where people poison one another by inches. You learn things from trays. Lydia Belro was seated at a small table by the window, a silver pot before her, and the kind of posture one sees in portraits of women who endured kings without believing in them. She wore pale grey and a string of pearls that had probably watched 3 wars and 6 family disappointments. When I entered, she did not rise, which saved us both effort. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "has Mr. Wolfe decided to come in person, or am I still to receive installments? He is sending the expensive half of the firm later, if he decides the household deserves him." She gave me a dry look. "Sit down." I obeyed. A maid poured tea and withdrew. Lydia waited until the door had closed, then said, "My sister-in-law told me you have questions about family customs. It feels indecent." "Madam, murder always feels indecent to somebody. Customs are often next in line." She let that pass. "What do you want to know? Who opens gifts first in this house?" "I do. Always. Yes. No exceptions. A parcel addressed to a servant would be different. One sent to a guest would be given to the guest, but anything sent ceremonially to the family, or to the house, or in compliment to a dinner, anniversary, holiday, or social occasion, comes first to me, because—" her chin rose exactly half an inch, "because I am Mrs. Belro." There it was. Pride right on schedule. Who knows that? Every own. Meaning the family. Meaning the family, the servants, our friends, my husband's associates, tradesmen we have dealt with for years. People who have dined here, people who send flowers at Christmas, people who have known the Belro house for 20 years. Must I enlarge the circle? That will do for a start. I sipped tea. It was good. Murder improves houses in odd ways. When did this custom begin? When I married Arthur. His mother had done the same before me. The house has always had forms. Did your husband care? Very much. Why? A shadow passed through her expression. Not grief, but irritation at being made to explain another person's vanity. Because order pleased him. Because he thought households should have shape. Because he disliked scrambling hands and noisy uncertainty. That matched what little I had already learned about Arthur Belro. Men who believe in order often mean their own. I set down my cup. "One more. Did he ever open such a package himself?" She hesitated, which improved the answer before she gave it. "Not first. Second, sometimes, if I handed it to him, or if he chose not to wait." "Mr. Goodwin, are you trying to discover how my husband was murdered, or merely building a museum of domestic trivia?" "The first, the second is a side effect." She stood then, a clear sign that tea was over whether I had finished or not. "Very well, if Mr. Wolfe asks." "Yes, everyone knew I would open the box first. I have no desire to pretend otherwise. It seems clear that whoever sent it knew the rule. That settled the first half of Wolfe's idea with enough polish to see your face in it. Nora Belro was upstairs in a sitting room with a book open on her lap and no sign of having read a line. She looked up when I entered and said, "Do you always arrive one room after discomfort?" "I aim for it. How are you?" "Bored of lying people." "That puts you in the majority." She almost smiled, then let it go. I asked her the same question. "Who opens first?" She said, "Mother, always. If a duchess sent us a gold elephant, Mother would cut the string. So anyone who knew the house would know that." "Yes, and your father." At that she shut the book. "Father never touched sweet things first. Never. Not unless he wanted to make an occasion of being contrary, and even then he would do it as a joke after saying he ought not." "Why not?" She shrugged. "He said it was common caution. Or else he said he preferred to let the ladies break the spell. It depended on who was listening." "That sounds like a man who wanted Prudence to look charming." "That sounds like Father," she said flatly. I nodded. Once he began, did he stop at one? Her gaze moved to the window. "Not usually." Meaning he was greedy about chocolates in a secretive way. He liked to pretend he did not care, then take two, while asking if anyone minded one. That exact. She turned back to me. "Something like it." "Why?" "Because phrasing is the cheapest fingerprint." She leaned forward. "Do you know something? I know your father did not eat sweets until someone else did first, and that once he started, he trusted the room too much. That is useful." She sat back. "Then whoever planned it knew him very well." "Yes." She said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "That narrows it more than I like. Families exist to narrow things more than anyone likes." I left her with that and found Clara Dean downstairs, polishing silver to a brightness that looked accusatory. She was willing to talk, because servants always are if you ask as if they are clever enough to answer. Most of them are. "Mrs. Belro opens first," Clara said at once. "Everybody knows it?" "Everybody." "Yes, sir. It is one of those things." "And Mr. Belro?" She gave a short laugh, then looked guilty for it. He would wait. Not because he cared for safety so much, as because he wanted to see whether the room approved. "Approved of what?" "The gift, sir. The sender, the flavor, the evening." He liked to see how others took it before he joined in. Then he would say he hoped no one minded, and take one, sometimes two. Did he have a favorite? "Walnut, I think." Well, sir, he liked nuts on top because they were easy to pick out without asking questions. That was worth carrying home in a gold frame. Easy to pick out without asking questions, not merely a taste, but a convenience. If a murderer knew that, he did not need guesswork. He needed only patience. I found Mrs. Krell in the back hall instructing a delivery boy in the moral significance of not dripping on polished wood. When she had got rid of him, she gave me one of her practical looks. "Back again." "Yes, I'm collecting Belro habits by the ounce. You'll need a barrel. Who opens first?" "Mrs. Belro. Who eats first?" "Depends." "On what?" "On pride," she said. That interested me. "Whose?" "All of them, in turn. But Mr. Belro with sweets. He'd hold off till a lady had taken some. Then he'd help himself as if generosity had forced it on him." "Ever take more than one?" "Did he breathe more than once?" She said. "Yes." "Would everyone in the house know that?" "Mr. Goodwin, everyone in the house knew when Mr. Belro coughed. He made a career of being observed." That was another useful sentence. Arthur Belro liked his household as an audience, and his habits as recurring jokes. A killer could work with that. Evan Belro I found in the library, standing by the desk where his father had died, and looking not at the floor, but at the shelves, as if the books had failed him by remaining in order. He did not turn when I entered. "You again," he said. "I travel in circles." "You travel in people's nerves?" "That too." "Question for the day. Who opens gifts first in this house?" He turned then, and the corner of his mouth lifted without amusement. "Mother. If a package arrives, Mother opens it. If lightning strikes, Mother would like to receive it on a tray." "Good. And your father?" With sweets, he gave a short breath that might have been a laugh if he had remembered how. He waited. He always waited. Afraid. Number calculating father, liked never to be first where embarrassment was possible. He'd let everyone else prove a thing harmless, or fashionable, or acceptable, and then he'd enter, as if he had meant to all along. And once he entered, he took what he wanted. One piece. Usually two, if they were small enough and he could pretend not to notice. Evan looked at me hard. You're smiling. Why? Because I'm hearing the same tune from different instruments. It means the murderer, if there was one in the house, did not need to guess nearly as much as Inspector Kramer would like. His face changed. You think it was somebody here? I think the list of people who knew these habits best is short. How short? I counted on my fingers. Family, servants, a close friend or two, possibly Peter Dross. At the mention of Dross, Evan's expression sharpened unpleasantly. If Dross did it, he'd have hired someone and written the bill off as romance. I'll keep that for the scrapbook. He's rotten, Evan said. That is not yet illegal. No, he said. Just expensive. I moved to the desk and looked at the polished wood, the empty blotter, the ashtray, the little horse paperweight. Who else knew the customs? He shrugged. Aunt Miriam, Pearlie, Krell, Clara, anyone who had lived here longer than a week. I turned. And you. I knew all of them. There are confessions and there are admissions. This was the second kind, but it still sat in the room heavily. Before I could press him, Miriam Belro came in without knocking, carrying a sheaf of papers and the air of a woman who considered doors advisory. She saw me, saw Evan, and said, "Am I interrupting innocence?" Only if it was about to happen, I said. She gave me a glance that would have chilled soup. Mr. Goodwin, have you learned anything beyond the fact that my sister-in-law enjoys ceremony? Yes, I've learned your brother's death was arranged around ritual, not merely opportunity. That sounds like Nero, Wolfe. It does when it's right. She laid the papers on the desk. Then tell him something else. Arthur despised spontaneity. If someone wanted to move him where they wished, they had only to place etiquette in front of him like a gate. Did you know that before he died? Of course. Who else did? All of us. Meaning family. Meaning family servants and any intelligent guest who had dined here twice. That broadened the circle, though not by much. I watched her. What did you take from the box that evening, Miss Belro? Caramel. Your brother. Something with a nut on top. I think. You think. She smiled then, thin and cold. Mr. Goodwin, if you expect the grief, stricken to remember chocolates like accountants remember receipts, you will be disappointed. On the contrary, I said. People remember trifles very well when the trifles become fatal. She gathered that in and gave back nothing. Evan had gone silent again, which in that house often meant a thought too dangerous for daylight. I stayed another 20 minutes and made a final sweep through the servants' quarters and back hall. By then the pattern was plain enough. Lydia opened first. Always. Arthur waited till someone else had sampled a sweet thing. Always, or nearly always. Then, once safety had been established by female courage or domestic routine, he took his share, and often a little more. He had a greedy streak, hidden beneath his careful smile, and the household had seen it too many times to call it charming anymore. So the murderer had relied on that as well. Lydia would open the box. She would take the first piece. Others might share. Arthur, seeing all safe, would certainly eat. That was the design. Not certainty of poison in the box, because by now the box itself looked about as guilty as a hymn book. No, the certainty was in the ritual. The killer had not mailed death. The killer had mailed a family performance and trusted the cast to know its lines. On the way out I paused in the front hall and looked back toward the drawing room. The Belro house had that peculiar stillness money sometimes buys, where the carpets are thick, the silver is bright, and every face has learned the value of not speaking first. But stillness is no defense against routine. If anything, routine is what lets murder slip in wearing gloves. The list of those who knew the Belro habits best was not long. Lydia, Nora, Evan, Miriam, Mrs. Krell, Pearlie, Clara. Maybe Peter Dross, if courtship had taken him far enough into the machinery of the house. Not many. All under one roof, or nearly near enough to smell its rules. Back at the brownstone I found Wolfe in the office, with his eyes closed and his lips set in the expression that means his brain is busy and everyone else's should apologize. I gave him the report in order. He did not interrupt until I repeated Clara Dean's remark about Belro choosing nut pieces, because they were easy to pick out without asking questions. Then he opened his eyes. "Yes," he said softly. "There, that is useful. I thought so. Not taste, then convenience, visibility. A man accustomed to selecting by sight and habit could be led by either." "He was," I said, "assuming what killed him came by the same route." Wolfe grunted. "Do not assume. But note this well. The sender knew Lydia would open first, and Belro would wait until safety was established. That is not knowledge held by strangers. It belongs to the household, or to an intimate of the household, which leaves us a cozy little circle. No circle is cozy when one member murders another." I sat. That line is good enough to sell. He ignored me. "Tomorrow we press on the medicine. If Belro truly said he was taking it, we must know what he meant, whether the phrase was literal, ironic, or planted. But for now you have earned your supper. I prefer cash. You are overpaid already." That ended the conference in Wolfe's usual spirit of gratitude. But as I went upstairs to wash before Fritz announced dinner, I carried with me the picture of that harmless heart, shaped box being set on the Belro table like an invitation. Lydia's hands would lift the lid, the women would taste, Arthur would wait, smiling his careful smile, until caution had been performed for him. Then he would take what was left, and maybe a little more. If you knew that much, you did not need poison in the chocolates. You needed only the house. Chapter 5. The poison that wasn't there. The autopsy report arrived like a bad whisper and stayed to sour the room. Inspector Kramer brought it himself, which is his way when he wants the pleasure of watching Nero Wolfe be wrong. He came in just before noon with the report in one hand and his hat in the other, looking like a man who had been promised simplicity and handed chemistry instead. Wolfe was at his desk, where the air held orchids and impatience in equal measure, and I was at mine pretending to organize facts that had already begun organizing me. Kramer said, "All right, you wanted the answer. Here's one." He tossed the report onto my desk. I read it first because Wolfe dislikes rustling paper, unless he is the one doing it. Arthur Belro had died from aconitine. It was enough to stop a strong man in less than an hour, and ugly enough in its effects to satisfy any doctor who enjoyed the dramatic side of medicine: tingling, constriction, muscular disorder, the nerves in revolt, the heart knocked out of time and duty, swift, vicious, and particular. There was no longer any need to talk about bitter almonds or cyanide guesses. Arthur Belro had been killed by aconitine. I handed the report to Wolfe. He read it once, laid it down, and shut his eyes. Kramer watched him. "Well?" Wolfe said. Yes, that annoyed Kramer because it admitted too little and yielded less. "Yes, what?" "Yes, Inspector, the poison is now identified. Also, yes, the original supposition about the chocolates grows less plausible." Kramer planted his feet. "The remaining chocolates are clean. No aconitine in the box. No aconitine in the wrappers. No aconitine in the paper cups. No residue worth calling a clue. No one else who ate from it got so much as a stomachache. Therefore Belro's dose was separate, single, and placed where only he would meet it." I said, "Which is almost pretty if you're fond of murder." Kramer ignored me. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Archie," he said, "we require the victim's clothes, fingernails, watch chain, handkerchief, pockets, and any object he handled after dinner." Kramer let out breath through his nose. "You require a great many things." "Yes. You'll get what the police have already collected, and not before I decide it won't damage the chain of evidence." Wolfe looked at him. "Inspector, your chain of evidence at present is a necklace made of family contradictions and one dead businessman. Bring the effects." That did it. Kramer swelled. Then he remembered, as he usually does, that Wolfe has the irritating habit of being useful. He muttered something not fit for Fritz's hearing and left. Since Fritz was in the hall at the time, that restriction was theoretical. The effects arrived an hour later in a plain evidence envelope carried by Sergeant Stebbins, who looked apologetic on Kramer's behalf and tired on his own. I signed for them, spread them on Wolfe's desk, and took inventory: wallet, keys, monogrammed lighter, gold watch, eyeglasses, handkerchief, a folded note with numbers on it in Belro's hand, one receipt, a slim leather card case, then one small item, polished and easy to overlook, slipped out and rolled against the desk blotter, a silver toothpick case. It was engraved with the initials AB. I picked it up. Well now. Wolfe extended a hand. I gave it to him. He weighed it lightly, thumbed the hinge, and opened it. Inside were two polished metal toothpicks, resting in narrow grooves, gentlemanly and absurd. One was bright and clean. The other looked no different until Wolfe turned it toward the lamp. Then, at the tip, I saw it, a faint discoloration, a dull whisper where the steel ought to have shone evenly. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Archie. Yes. Telephone. Lydia Belro. I did. She came on after a delay just long enough to prove reluctance and not enough to prove innocence. Mrs. Belro, I said. Mr. Wolfe wants a point of household routine. Did your husband carry a toothpick case? There was a pause. Then, yes, of course, use it regularly. Constantly. Arthur never ended a meal without one of those ridiculous polished toothpicks. He said wooden ones were vulgar. Wolfe crooked a finger, and I put the receiver near him, he said. Mrs. Belro. After every meal. Yes. After roast. Yes. After wine. Yes. After chocolates. She hesitated. I suppose so. Yes. Even at home. Especially at home. He was vain about such things. Thank you. He hung up, I said. Vanity disguised as hygiene. Yes. I took the case back from him and looked at it. The box invited appetite. The toothpick followed dinner as a matter of course. And if one of them were treated with aconitine, Wolfe said, Belro would administer the poison to himself with elegance. That was neat enough to make a man shiver. Stebbins, who had remained by the door as if uncertain whether he was allowed to breathe in the office, said, You think that's it? Wolfe looked at him. I think it merits immediate testing. Stebbins nodded and reached for the case, but Wolfe held it a moment longer. Who examined this? Stebbins said. Search team on the body, property clerk, lab intake. And none noticed the stain. Stebbins flushed. Not till now, apparently. Why? The case went back downtown with Stebbins and a fresh layer of police embarrassment. After he had gone, I sat on the corner of my desk and looked at Wolfe. You had that in mind from the medicine remark? Partly, he said. How? Belro told Dr. Winsett he was taking his medicine. The phrase was either literal, ironic, or contrived. If literal, there should have been medicine. None had appeared. Therefore, one must look for a personal habit that could be described that way in jest, or in concealment. Also, aconitine is not obliging. It does not vanish from solid surfaces without reason. A separate object was likely. And a toothpick is separate, single, and private. Yes. Assuming he used it in the library, Wolfe grunted, which he almost certainly did. Men of punctilious vanity do not postpone such rituals. The laboratory confirmed it by 4:30. Kramer telephoned, and I knew from the first sound he made that he was swallowing rage by the spoonful. Aconitine, he said. On the stained toothpick, trace but decisive. I let out a whistle he could hear. Congratulations, Inspector. You have now solved the mystery of why the chocolates were innocent. Tell Wolfe not to crow. He doesn't crow. He merely radiates. Kramer came to the line himself a second later, which meant he had already been there, looming. Put him on. Wolfe took the receiver. Yes, yes, of course it was aconitine. No, Inspector, I do not require applause. because the killer depended on sequence. Appetite first, habit second. Yes, exactly. The box created expectation. The toothpick delivered death. He listened, then said, "Number not yet. The opportunity remains broad, though the design is narrowed. Anyone who knew Belrose after dinner habit and could access the case might have prepared it." He listened again, and his face altered slightly. "What? Ah, good, very good. Then come here at once." He hung up. "Well, Kramer says the case was found in Belrose's right jacket pocket, not in the library desk. Therefore, either he carried it in ready condition or someone had access to his clothing before dinner. That widens it again. Number it redirects it." I was still considering the difference when Saul Panzer came in. He had the look he gets when facts have started behaving. "Peter Dross," he said, "was in Belrose's dressing room 2 evenings before the murder." That got my attention. Why? Belrose had summoned him privately. Dross left angry. A maid heard raised voices. Later, Dross told a friend Belrose had treated him like a footman. Wolfe nodded. And Belrose's dressing room would contain clothes, personal effects, jewelry, collar studs, possibly the toothpick case. "Possibly," Wolfe said. I said, "Only possibly. That feels stingy." "Because Dross is too obvious," Wolfe said. "Debt, resentment, access. A child could arrange him as a suspect. Children rarely use aconitine. Number, but adults sometimes arrange children's puzzles." At 6, we had Miriam Belrose in the office because she had insisted on being informed of developments and because Wolfe, contrary to his reputation, occasionally uses impatience as bait. She came in stiff, backed, black, dressed, and sharp-eyed, and stood before the desk like an outraged trustee. "Well," Wolfe said, "your brother was not poisoned by a chocolate. He was poisoned by a metal toothpick treated with aconitine." For the first time since I had met her, she lost the exact management of her face. Not much. A flicker only. "But enough. A toothpick," she said. "Yes, that is grotesque." "Number it is intimate," Wolfe said. "Who knew of Arthur Belrose's habit?" She frowned. "Everyone who had dined with him more than twice. At home especially, he was insufferably regular. Did he keep the case in a usual place?" "In his dressing room, I think, or in the pocket of whatever jacket he wore for dinner." "Who had access to those?" Her eyes came to me and then back to Wolfe. "His valet died years ago. Since then, his clothes were laid out by Ames or by Arthur himself. Lydia would know more." She rose then, signaling she had given enough. At the door she paused. "If the box was only a diversion," she said, "then the person who sent it wanted the family looking in the wrong direction." "Yes. And is that not itself useful?" Wolfe's lips moved. "It is now." When she had gone, I said, "You think she knew about the habit more vividly than she wanted to admit?" "Everyone in that house knows more vividly than is convenient. At dinner, Fritz sent up duck with orange and a potato preparation, so good I almost forgave the Belrose for existing." Wolfe ate in silence, which meant the case was chewing at him. Afterward, back in the office with coffee, he had me lay out the sequence again. "Arthur Belrose dresses for dinner," he said. "He either places the toothpick case in his pocket himself, or someone places the jacket ready for him. The box arrives and compels household ritual. Lydia opens first, others sample. Arthur waits, then eats, because custom makes the room safe. After dinner he goes to the library. There he says to Dr. Winsett, 'Later, doctor, I'm taking my medicine.' Shortly thereafter he uses the poisoned toothpick and dies." I nodded. "The box had one job, to make us stare at chocolates." "Yes, it also had another job." I waited. "To establish tone, sentiment, domesticity. A heart-shaped box is absurd in a house like that, which is why it is useful. It makes people talk, laugh, speculate, pass it about. It obscures a quieter act, or preparing access to it." The phone rang again. This time it was Lydia Belro requesting, in a voice wrapped tight enough to cut skin, whether Mr. Wolfe had discovered anything that materially altered the shame of the thing. I relayed it. Wolfe took the phone. "Madam, yes, your husband's killer relied not upon sweets, but upon his vanity. No, I do not say by whom, not yet, but I advise you to speak truthfully tomorrow when Mr. Goodwin asks where your husband kept his dinner jacket, laid out, and who might reach it." He hung up before she could answer. That was abrupt. She had already lied to me 3 times. Only 3. For today. By 9 the facts stood hard enough to build on. Arthur Belro had not died from anything in the chocolates. No trace of aconitine was found in the remaining sweets. No one else who ate from the box showed a sign of it. Therefore, his fatal dose had been separate, single, and hidden where only he would meet it. The silver toothpick case had held 2 polished metal picks. One clean, the other carrying a faint stain at the tip, invisible unless turned to the lamp. The laboratory had done no more than confirm what Wolfe had recognized the moment the case opened in his hand. The box had invited appetite. The toothpick had delivered death. Upstairs in my room later, I stood by the window and watched the lights of the city tremble in the dark, like expensive doubts. Somewhere under another roof, perhaps that very minute, one of the Belros was thinking the case had turned against them, and trying to decide whether fear should look like grief, or anger, or dignity. Somewhere Peter Dross was counting debts and rehearsing innocence. Somewhere Inspector Kramer was wishing Nero Wolfe less right and more available. As for me, I had the uneasy comfort of knowing the method now, and none of the peace that comes with motive. Aconitine on a toothpick was not the trick of a stranger with a grudge. It was a private murder, arranged by someone who knew how Arthur Belro ate, what he carried, what he called medicine when he wished to be droll, and how to put a fatal object in his pocket without attracting a glance. A harmless heart-shaped box had started the evening. A little polished sliver of metal had ended it. And between the two lay the house itself, smiling with locked faces. Chapter 6. The hands that could reach once the weapon stepped into the light. The house grew narrower. That is one of the conveniences of murder. Before you know the method, everyone looks possible and half the city seems to have motive. Once the method stands up and clears its throat, a great many people sit down. Aconitine on a metal toothpick was not the work of a casual enemy or a melodramatic fool. It required intimacy, timing, and a working knowledge of Arthur Belro's habits, so exact it might as well have been engraved on the silver case with his initials. Who could have touched the toothpick case? Who knew he would use it after dinner, after whiskey, after chocolates, because vanity had become muscle memory? Who understood that the heart-shaped box would draw him in, occupy the room, and send Kramer's boys pawing at satin and paper, while the real poison rode in his pocket like a gentleman's accessory? The answer had to belong to someone who knew the Belro rituals the way a priest knows. Liturgy Wolfe said as much after breakfast, seated behind his desk with his eyes half shut and his fingertips together. "Archie, the murder was accomplished by access masked as routine. Therefore, our universe contracts. Not who hated Belro, who could reach him without being observed as reaching." "I've got a cheerful list," I told him. "Lydia, Nora, Evan, Miriam, Ames the butler if he laid out the clothes. Maybe Krell in a pinch, maybe Dross if he got near the dressing room, and perhaps St. Peter if he moonlighted in men's furnishings. Do not be frivolous. I'm saving it for old age." Wolfe grunted. "Beggin' with the obvious victims of suspicion, Lydia." So I did. Lydia Belro received me in the small downstairs sitting room with a book closed on her lap, and the look of a woman who had slept exactly enough to sharpen resentment. I asked her directly whether she had access to Arthur's dinner jacket before the fatal evening. "Of course," she said. "I am not an intruder in my own house. Did you place the toothpick case in his pocket? Numbered, did you ever?" "Sometimes years ago, not recently." "Who did recently?" "He did or Ames did, depending on whether he dressed in a hurry or wanted to complain about studs." "Would you have known he carried it that evening?" "I would have assumed it. Arthur never dined without it." "That gave her access, certainly. But motive is a finicky thing. Her quarrels with Arthur, so far as I had found them, were domestic, tired, and old, his control, her dignity, his corrections, her refusals. She had endured him too long and too skillfully for this kind of cold mechanism to feel like her. Lydia did not strike me as a poison woman. She struck me as a silence woman. Nora was easier to talk to and harder to read. She met me upstairs again, this time by the window, with no book and no teacup and more honesty in her face than in the whole rest of the house put together. "Father opposed my marriage," she said before I asked it. "To whom?" "A newspaperman, Paul Varan." "Empty pockets." "Yes." "Your father objected to that." "My father objected to anything he had not chosen himself." She folded her arms. "You may put it in your notebook if it saves time." "It might." I studied her. "Did you hate him enough to kill him?" "Number." "You loved drama too much to use a toothpick." That startled a laugh out of her, brief and unwilling. "That is almost insulting." It was meant kindly. "I loved open quarrels," she said. "Not this. Not machinery. Not little polished tricks." I believed her, which doesn't mean she was innocent, only that if she had done it, she had found a colder self than the one she wore in daylight. Evan was in worse shape and less use. Saul Panzer had turned up the debts, and they smelled like panic. Arthur Belro had recently refused to pay them. That gave the Sun motive with a vulgar clarity Kramer would appreciate. But when I asked about the toothpick case, Evan looked honestly miserable. "Yes, I knew about it," he said. "Everyone did, father with his metallic little after-dinner ritual. He'd sit there smiling, as if civilization depended on it. Could you have got at it?" "I could have got at everything in the house. That's not the same as doing it. Number, but it helps." He looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "If I'd killed him, I wouldn't have wrapped it in a valentine." That was not evidence, but it was in character. Miriam Belro was another matter. She had lived with the family 10 years and knew every household habit better than the wallpaper did. She knew which chair Arthur preferred after dinner, which claret he called drinkable, which servants he corrected by name and which by cough. She knew Lydia opened gifts first. She knew Arthur waited on sweets until someone else had sampled them. She knew he used the silver toothpicks after every meal. She knew, in short, enough to stage his evening without appearing in it. But knowledge is not guilt. It is only the shape guilt prefers. The missing crack in the wall came from Julian Haft, the family solicitor, who had the sort of office where leather chairs and old law books make even extortion seem reputable. He did not want to talk. Then I said Nero Wolfe's name, and he wanted not to talk more carefully. Mr. Belro did alter his will. He admitted at last, after 2 rounds of professional stiffness. 2 weeks ago. How? I am not at liberty. You are at liberty if you prefer Kramer discovering you withheld relevant information in a murder inquiry. That offended him exactly enough to help. The new version reduced certain discretionary provisions, he said. Miss Miriam Belro's allowance among them. Mr. Belro also intended, mind you, not yet executed, to end her residence in the house by autumn. I sat back. Send her away. Yes. Who knew? Mr. Belro, myself. And, as I regrettably realized later, perhaps Miss Belro. Perhaps. She came into the outer office unexpectedly while I was with Mr. Belro. She could not have heard every word, but she heard enough to understand the direction of the conversation. There it was, motive, arriving cleanly, and without apology. Miriam had lived in comfort under her brother's roof for 10 years. Now Arthur meant to cut her allowance and send her from the house after the summer. No one else knew, except the solicitor and Miriam herself, who had overheard enough to hear her future being folded shut like a letter. I took that back to the brownstone and gave it to Wolfe in full. He listened with eyes shut, not moving except once to touch his lip with a finger. When I finished, he said, "Yes. Motive enough." "Certainly. Access. Abundantly." "Then why don't you look pleased?" "Because motive plus access equals irritation, not proof." He opened his eyes. Miriam Belro now stands where the light reaches her. Good, but I require the final fact. The one fact. Yes, I got up and paced once, which Wolfe dislikes in others, because he considers movement a confession of inferior thought. What door are we still missing? The only one worth opening, he said. How did she prepare the toothpick, without risking Belro selecting the other one? I stopped. The case had held 2 toothpicks, one clean, one poisoned. Arthur might have taken either, unless something made the choice certain. Wolfe saw it land in me and nodded. Exactly. The murderer did not traffic in chance. Not in this case. Therefore there must have been a reason Belro would select the poisoned one and not the clean one. A mark. A placement. A habit of taking the left instead of the right. Some minute. Domestic certainty. I stared at him. And if we find that, we have a door with no other side. That was Wolfe at his best and worst. Elegant, exact, and infuriatingly ahead. So suspicion had narrowed. Lydia had access, but not the right kind of motive. Nora had cause, but too much visible feeling and not enough ice. Evan had debts and anger and opportunity, but no touch for such private craft. Miriam had lived among the Belro rituals, long enough to breathe them. And now she had motive too, hard and practical and humiliating. But Wolfe would not move on motive alone. He wanted the small certainty hidden inside the silver case, the one fact that would turn suspicion into conclusion. A poisoned toothpick had killed Arthur Belro. Now we needed to learn why he had chosen that one. Chapter 7. The ribbon merchant Archie Goodwin went hunting through the city because evil, however grandly it performs at home, usually shops somewhere under fluorescent lights and pays retail. Wolfe had given me the assignment after breakfast with his usual economy. Find the ribbon. That narrows New York to a village. Then walk briskly. So I did. The black satin ribbon from the Belro box had already been prodded and sniffed by the police laboratory and found innocent of chemistry, which only made it more interesting. Murderers are often careless with poison and meticulous with wrapping. They know death may pass unnoticed. Style never does. I started with department stores and large confectioners and got nowhere except sore feet and opinions. The ribbon was too narrow for the standard stock at the better stores, too fine in the weave, and cut with a hand that knew the difference between utility and display. By noon I had reduced the city, which is one of my lesser miracles, to 3 specialty shops downtown. The third one was on Broome Street, tucked between a dealer in lamps and a woman who sold imported paper as if it were contraband. The ribbon shop was run by a little man with silver spectacles and fingers that handled silk as if it were theology. His name was Barron. He looked at the sample I brought and nodded before I had finished my sentence. Yes, he said. Mine, that's a handsome confession. He ignored it. Black satin, narrow French edge, not what the big stores use. They buy cheaper. I sell better. Did you sell this recently? Of course recently. Ribbon does not live forever in New York. He peered at me. You are asking about a specific purchase. I am. He thought for a moment. Not theatrically, just carefully. Men who remember stock well often remember customers better because one explains the other. 3 days before the rain, a heart-shaped box also. Sold together. Yes, empty box, silver paper, black satin ribbon. That a common combination. Not for sensible people, I grinned. Did you sell it to a man or a woman? A woman. Describe her. He spread his hands. Dark coat, hat veil, half down because of rain and hurry. Severe. Not young, not old. Good gloves. A voice that expected obedience from objects. That could have been half the women on the better side of Fifth Avenue and all the dangerous ones. Anything else? He frowned, then brightened faintly. Yes, she asked a question. What question? She said, does it look suitably romantic, but not foolish? That one went into me like a pin, I said. You remember that exact? Certainly, because I told her romance is almost always foolish, and she did not smile. That helped too. I thanked him and walked back uptown with the phrase, turning over in my head, romantic, but not foolish. Not a lover's purchase. Then, no blush in it. no real sentiment. It was an imitation of sentiment, designed to enter a respectable house under the shield of custom and not be laughed out of the drawing room. That felt less like passion than management. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office looking like a carved idol to applied thought. I gave it to him in order. He shut his eyes when I repeated the line. Suitably romantic, but not foolish, he murmured. Nice distinction. Yes. He opened his eyes. Not the language of impulse, the language of taste supervising disguise. That was my reading. He grunted. Search the clippings. For what? For Miriam Belro. I went to the files and then to the newspaper morgue notes we kept for convenience and vanity. Miriam had done charitable work, chaired committees, opened bazaars, arranged flowers for causes that could afford her, and once run a gala for St. Oran's Hospital. There was an interview clipping, the usual society page confection made of adjectives and expensive fabrics. In it, the reporter praised the decorations, and Miriam had said, "I like things romantic, but never foolish." He read it once and laid it down. Good enough. Number. I had expected that, because a phrase is a fingerprint only when the hand is still attached. Precisely. He sat back. It is good, Archie, but not enough. Clever people repeat themselves. Innocent people also repeat themselves. We need the joining fact. I was about to tell him I had one more item when the front doorbell rang. Fritz answered it, and a moment later Clara Dean was shown in, damp with nerves and wearing a coat she had put on too quickly. She stood just inside the office door, as if uncertain whether entering Nero Wolfe's presence required a curtsy or a permit. I said, "Hello, Clara. Sit down before Wolfe mistakes you for decoration." She sat on the edge of the red leather chair and looked at Wolfe, then at me. "I shouldn't be here. That is often the best reason to come." She swallowed. "I remembered something I didn't yesterday. Because the police keep asking the wrong way, and everybody in that house looks at you as if memory itself were disloyal." Wolfe said, "Speak." She did. About an hour before dinner on the evening Arthur Belro died. She had gone to his dressing room with a laundered shirt he had sent back for a button. The door had been partly open. Miriam Belro was inside. "Doing what?" I asked. She said she was looking for a book Mr. Belro had borrowed. She was by the dressing table. Was Mr. Belro there? "No, sir." "Did that strike you as odd?" "Yes, sir, because Mr. Belro didn't keep books there." Wolfe's eyes had narrowed to slits of attention. What was on the dressing table? His watch brushes, a silver case, little things. I didn't stare, only. She stopped. Only what? Only I remember the silver case, because Miss Miriam had it in her hand, and then set it down when she saw me. There it was. Arthur Belro kept his toothpick case in the dressing room until he dressed for dinner. Clara had seen Miriam there alone, an hour before dinner, with the case in her hand inventing a book no one kept in that room. The ribbon phrase tied Miriam to the purchase of the empty heart box and its black satin trim. The dressing room sighting tied her to the means. Now it was enough. After Clara had gone, Wolfe sat without speaking for nearly a minute. Then he opened his eyes fully. "Yes," he said, "now we have structure." I nodded. Miriam bought the empty box and ribbon. Miriam knew Lydia would open it first. Miriam knew Arthur would wait, then eat. Miriam knew he would use the toothpick after dinner. Miriam had motive from the will, access from the household, and now direct access to the case. "Yes, but you still look dissatisfied." "I am not dissatisfied. I am arranging." "That sounds expensive." He ignored it. "Tomorrow we gather them. Kramer too. Miriam Belro has supplied us with method, disguise, and access. What remains is choice. Choice. Which toothpick Belro would use. That clicked back into place. The final little certainty. Exactly, she would not risk chance. Therefore she knew which pick he habitually took first from the case. I grinned. And somewhere in that respectable mausoleum of a house someone knows. Wolfe leaned back. "Yes, and tomorrow before noon. So shall we." That night the city looked clean again from my window, which was one more lie New York tells with a straight face. Down on Broome Street, a ribbon merchant had sold a woman the trimmings for romance without love. Uptown, in a dressing room where no books were kept, that same woman had stood with a silver toothpick case in her hand. Between the two had lain a heart-shaped box, a family ritual, and a brother whose future plans no longer included his sister. The case was no longer a fog, it was a corridor. And at the end of it stood Miriam Belro. Chapter 8. The story she told too well. Wolfe assembled them in the Belro drawing room, where the box had first sat like a pretty threat in silver paper. Rain struck the windows again, as if the weather had decided the performance deserved accompaniment. Kramer stood ready with the look of a man who hated speeches but loved arrests. The room had been arranged with the uneasy precision of a place, expecting scandal and determined to seat it comfortably. Lydia Belro sat in the long chair nearest the fireplace, erect and pale and armored in grey silk. Nora stood by the mantel, one hand against it as though steadying the house by contact. Evan had taken the far end of the sofa and lounged there with deliberate carelessness that fooled no one present, least of all himself. Peter Dross remained near the window, his face composed and expensive and watchful. Miriam Belro sat where the silver paper and the empty heart-shaped box had once lain, as if proximity to the scene entitled her to authority over its meaning. Wolfe, who did not lightly leave West 35th Street, had made the expedition with bad grace and a good reason. He sat now in a broad chair fetched for him from the library. His bulk settled into it with the permanence of an institution. I stood at one side. Kramer stood at the other, broad, red, and impatient. Dr. Winsett had been invited and looked unhappy to have accepted. Mrs. Krell and Pearlie Ames waited just beyond the drawing room doors, summoned to the edge of hearing, and not liking it. The rain kept up its soft tapping at the windows. The silver ribbon and the heart-shaped box rested on a side table, harmless and decorative and guilty only of being useful. Wolfe began in the tone he uses when laying out facts too simple to be interrupted. Arthur Belro was not poisoned by a chocolate. The remaining chocolates were harmless. The wrappings were harmless. The box was harmless, in the direct sense, though not in the practical one. The anonymous gift was bait, not blade. No one moved. Even Dross had enough sense to keep still when Wolfe's voice went that flat. The murderer counted on Mrs. Belro opening the box first, because she always did. The murderer counted on others taking pieces, thereby making the sweets appear safe. The murderer counted further on Arthur Belro's own ritual. He would not take a sweet thing before someone else had done so, but once reassured, he would help himself. And after sweets he always used one of the polished metal toothpicks from his silver case. He paused. That toothpick, not the candy, carried the aconitine. Kramer grunted. He had heard it already, but he enjoyed hearing it where other people had to suffer. Miriam said, "That proves nothing. Anyone in the house knew his habits." She had spoken too soon. I felt it, and from the quick turn of Kramer's head I knew he felt it too. Wolfe inclined his head. Yes, anyone in the house knew his habits, but not everyone would design murder around etiquette. Not everyone would think first of custom, then of appetite, then of vanity. Not everyone would buy an empty heart-shaped box and black satin ribbon to counterfeit romance in a respectable house. Miriam's face did not change much, but there are silences that tense around a person as if awaiting an order, and this one tensed around her. Wolfe went on. The box and ribbon were purchased on Broome Street 3 days before the murder by a severe woman in a dark coat. The merchant remembered one phrase distinctly. She asked whether the box looked suitably romantic, but not foolish. Nora turned sharply toward her aunt. Peter Dross's eyes narrowed. Lydia Belro's hands tightened once on the arms of her chair. Wolfe said, "That phrase is not common. It appears in a published interview with Miss Miriam Belro concerning decorations for the St. Oran's Hospital Gala. Romantic, she said, but never foolish. That is not proof, but it is style, and style is often the beginning of carelessness." Miriam's mouth moved. A newspaper clipping, Really? No, Wolfe said. Not really. Merely usefully. He let that settle and then added, more to the point, Clara Dean saw you in Arthur Belrose's dressing room an hour before dinner. You claimed you were searching for a book, though no books were kept there. She saw the silver toothpick case in your hand. That one landed harder. Evan sat forward. Lydia made a small sound and mastered it. Dr. Winsett removed his spectacles and polished them, a physician's way of pretending not to hear. Miriam said, I had every right to be in my brother's room. Certainly, Wolfe said. You had rights, access, and motive. Arthur Belrose had changed his will 2 weeks earlier. Your allowance was to be reduced. Your residence in this house was to end after the summer. You overheard enough at Mr. Haft's office to know your future had been folded smaller. Her face did not collapse, it sharpened. Kramer shifted his weight. He was readying himself, not for movement yet, but for the pleasure of it. Wolfe did not hurry. He never does at the good part. You knew Lydia would open the box first. You knew others would taste from it, proving it safe. You knew Arthur's caution about sweets and his greed, once caution had been satisfied. You knew, above all, that after dinner he would use his toothpick case. Therefore the heart-shaped box was sent only to arrange behavior and direct suspicion to the wrong object, Miriam said. Very clearly. You cannot know that I poisoned the toothpick. You have no witness. No witness to the application. No, Wolfe said. But something better. A witness to your knowledge. That stirred the room. Kramer's head came up. So did mine, though I had heard most of it before, and knew enough to enjoy the placement. Wolfe turned his gaze directly on Miriam Belrose. From the first, he said. You insisted that the poison must have been hidden in Arthur's particular chocolate. No one spoke. Wolfe continued. Others were confused. Mrs. Belrose feared scandal. Nora contradicted herself in shock. Evan was angry and tired. Mr. Dross was polished and useless. The police considered the possibility of poison in the box generally, then in a selected chocolate, only after evidence suggested it. But you, Miss Belrose, adopted at once the notion that the murder had been intended for Arthur alone. Miriam's eyes flicked once to Kramer, then back to Wolfe. Because no one else was ill. Exactly, that is the explanation you now offer. But at the beginning, before the autopsy, before the toothpick, before it was certain the chocolates themselves were innocent, you did not speculate broadly. You did not say perhaps the whole box had been tampered with, or perhaps one random piece. You fastened immediately on selection, Kramer said. I remember that. So do I said. Wolfe nodded once. Because you knew the poison was meant for Arthur alone. You knew it could not be in all the chocolates. You knew because you placed it on the toothpick. The silence after that had shape and weight. Rain tapped at the windows. A log settled in the fire with a tiny sound like a cough politely suppressed. Miriam Belrose did not wilt. She became, if anything, more exactly herself. Her back straightened, her chin lifted. The cold composure she had worn all week hardened from armor into weapon. You think that is enough? She asked. No, Wolfe said. Therefore I obtained the final fact. That got everyone, including Kramer. Wolfe rested a hand on the arm of his chair. A silver toothpick case holding 2 picks presents a difficulty. A murderer, as intelligent as you, would not risk Belrose selecting the wrong one. You would require certainty. I therefore asked a question no policeman had yet asked, because policemen are often content with broad truths and neglect the narrow ones that finish a case. He turned his head slightly. Mrs. Krell. The housekeeper entered from the hall, broad and steady and deeply unwilling to be dramatic. Wolfe said, Tell them what you told Archie Goodwin. Mrs. Krell folded her hands. Mr. Belrose always took the right-hand toothpick first. That moved through the room like current. Evan inhaled sharply. Nora closed her eyes. Lydia looked not at Miriam, but at the floor. Wolfe said, Because he was right, handed and habitual, to the point of absurdity. Mrs. Krell knew it because she had more than once refilled the case. Pearlie Ames confirmed it. So did Mrs. Belrose when pressed. The poisoned toothpick was the one placed in the right-hand groove. Kramer swore softly, with admiration buried under professional irritation. Wolfe's voice remained level. Miss Belro had access to the case in the dressing room. She had motive from the will. She purchased the empty romantic box and ribbon. She understood the household ritual well enough to make the gift function as camouflage. She understood Arthur Belro's habits well enough to know which toothpick he would take, and from the first she spoke not like a bewildered relative, but like a designer anxious to direct attention toward one selected chocolate and away from the private object that actually killed him. Miriam turned to her sister-in-law, Lydia. It was not an appeal. It was almost a contemptuous summons, as though Lydia owed her a better audience. Lydia Belro lifted her head slowly and met her eyes. "You heard him," Lydia said. Miriam laughed once softly. "He makes it sound tidy." "It was tidy," Wolfe said. "That was your failing. You arranged too well." She looked at him. "Do you know what Arthur intended? Do you know what 10 years in this mausoleum cost? His corrections, his little rules, his money parceled out like medicine to an invalid. He would have sent me away with an allowance fit for a widow on sufferance." "No doubt," Wolfe said, "but you were not compelled to murder him." Her lips thinned. Compelled. Number but instructed. Daily, hourly, elegantly. By a man who preferred everyone dependent and then despised them for it. Kramer took a step forward. "That's enough." She didn't look at him. She looked at Nora instead, then Evan. "I did you both a kindness," she said. "He would have ruined you in his own image." Nora's voice came low and fierce. "You killed him with a toothpick." Miriam turned back to Wolfe. "And if I had not spoken too well," Wolfe's eyes half closed, "then something else would have betrayed you. Murder is not difficult, Miss Belro. Restraint afterward is." Kramer moved then, not theatrically, just with the blunt competence of a man who has had enough speeches and would now like handcuffs. Miriam rose before he touched her. "I will get my coat," she said. "No," Kramer told her. "You'll get it later." For the first time, something like fatigue crossed her face. Not fear, not collapse. Merely fatigue, as if the effort of keeping shape had at last cost more than the shape was worth. She gave Lydia one unreadable glance, another to the rain, dark windows, and let Kramer take her arm. When they had gone, the room seemed immediately larger and much poorer. Peter Dross was the first to move. "Well," he said, and even he could think of nothing to add. He collected his gloves and made a retreat that might once have been called tactful and was now merely prompt. Dr. Winsett muttered that he was no use to anyone further, and followed. Evan remained where he was, staring at the door through which his aunt had gone. Nora lowered herself into a chair, as if her knees had ceased to be a matter of confidence. Lydia Belro stayed upright and still, her face composed again but altered by some interior subtraction. Wolfe rose with difficulty and distaste, since standing outside his own house is always a reproach to him. "I said, finished." He looked at the empty heart-shaped box on the side table. Yes, the story she told too well finished her. Rain still tapped at the windows. The silver paper caught the lamplight and gave it back without warmth. A harmless box had entered that house under the shield of custom. A poisoned toothpick had done the rest. And in the end it was not the aconitine nor the ribbon, nor even the dressing room visit that broke Miriam Belro, but her own impatience to guide the tale before anyone else could tell it wrong. That is the trouble with clever murderers. They always want authorship. Chapter 9. The sisters' grievance when Miriam Belro finally spoke. Her voice came out thin and bright, like glass deciding whether to break. She did not deny entering Arthur's room. She did not deny buying the box. She denied only the word murder, as if language itself had wronged her before the law ever could. Inspector Kramer had paused at the drawing-room door, with a hand still firm on her arm, and Nero Wolfe, who dislikes interruption almost as much as locomotion, had made a small motion of assent. So they stayed. Rain worried at the windows. The lamps burned steadily. The empty heart-shaped box on the side table had lost its prettiness and become what it had really been all along. A prop. Miriam stood straight, one gloved hand free, the other caught by Kramer's grip, and looked not at Wolfe first, but at Lydia. "You sit there," she said. "As if this house had ever been yours in any true sense. Arthur let us all live by his preferences. He fed us with rules and called it order." Lydia's eyes opened. "Do not make me your witness." Miriam gave a sharp little smile. "You were his witness for 25 years. Then she turned to Wolfe. "Very well. I bought the box. I tied the ribbon. I wanted him uneasy. I wanted him to feel, for one evening, that something could enter his house without his permission and arrange his nerves. Is that such monstrous wickedness?" "No," Wolfe said. "Only preparation." Her chin lifted. "You prefer things tidy." So did Arthur. That was his genius. Tidiness with cruelty inside it. No one answered. She went on because silence, once granted, had become her stage. "After our father died, Arthur promised he would look after me." That was the phrase, look after. It sounds noble until one has lived under it. "He kept me in this house." Yes, he paid my expenses, yes, and in return, he made me feel the cost of every chair, every gown, every dinner invitation. He corrected my speech before guests. He laughed at my age, my opinions, my charities, my taste in flowers. He treated me as a tolerated expense, never as kin. Her voice did not rise. It thinned further, and that made it worse. The new will would send me away with less than enough to remain respectable. For a Belro, respectability is not comfort, it is air. Without it, one does not descend, one disappears. Evan shifted in his chair and looked at her, as if seeing not an aunt but a family document with the seals broken. Nora had both hands pressed together in her lap so tightly the knuckles were white. Wolfe said, "That explains resentment. It does not explain aconitin." Miriam's face changed then, not softening, not hardening, but showing strain at the edges as if the effort of exact speech had begun to cost her. "I did not mean to kill him." Kramer made a noise deep in his throat. Wolfe only watched, she said. "I wanted him frightened, humbled, ill for a day. Perhaps two, enough to teach him that he was not untouchable. Enough to let him imagine dependence. Enough to make him remember that other people in his precious household had nerves and futures too." "With aconitine?" Wolfe asked. "I did not know how much." Color rose in her cheeks. "You sit there and pronounce as if motive were mathematics. You know nothing of years, nothing of slow humiliation." "I know," Wolfe said, "that a woman who selects aconitine, applies it to a toothpick, and contrives an entire domestic performance around its use, is not improvising a lesson. She is making an end." Miriam's eyes flashed. "You are wrong, perhaps in your private phrasing, not in law, not in fact." Nora made a sound then, and all the room turned to her. She had not burst into tears as weaker people do. The crying came broken and unwilling, as if grief had snagged on too many hooks inside her. She covered her mouth with one hand, but it did not stop the small, fractured rhythm of it. "I thought," she said, and had to stop. "Then again, I thought we were all only angry. I thought that was the worst of us." Evan got up, walked 2 steps, stopped, and looked at Miriam with a kind of dazed revulsion. "You wrapped it like a joke," he said. Miriam swung to him. "Do not judge me with that face. You have his temper and half his weakness." "Maybe," Evan said. "But I never wanted him dead on a rug." That landed where it had to. Lydia Belro had closed her eyes. I could not tell whether it was grief, exhaustion, or relief that the old household rituals had not themselves stood accused. She opened them after a moment and spoke without looking at Miriam. "You should have left." Miriam laughed once, very softly. "To where?" Lydia had no answer to that. None of them did. On Riddle Street, love had not killed. Love had hardly been given the chance. Habit had opened the door, and bitterness had walked through, dressed like good breeding. The family had called its rituals dignity, order, tradition, propriety. Miriam had used those same things as tools. She had known Lydia would open the box. She had known the room would make the chocolates safe by ceremony. She had known Arthur would take what looked harmless and then finish the evening with his little silver vanity. A house can teach murder without intending to. It need only rehearse obedience long enough. Kramer tightened his hold on Miriam's arm. That's all. She did not resist. She looked once around the room, not searching for mercy, only measuring what remained of her audience. Then she said, almost lightly, "At least now he cannot send me away." No one answered that either. When she had gone with Kramer and Stebbins, the drawing room did not feel emptier. It felt stripped. Peter Dross had drifted off already, sensing no advantage remained. Dr. Winsett had vanished in professional discomfort. The servants kept wisely out of sight. What remained was the family, reduced at last to itself. Wolfe rose, which for him is always both effort and verdict. He glanced at the silver paper, the black ribbon, the harmless box. "A grievance," he said, "is a dangerous possession. People polish it, feed it, warm it, and call the result justice." I moved to his side. Nora's weeping had quieted to silence. Evan stood staring into nothing useful. Lydia Belrose sat very straight, as if posture were the last inheritance no law could alter. Outside, rain still touched the windows with patient fingers. Inside, the Belrose house had lost the one thing it had trusted most, its own manners. Chapter 10. The last piece in the box back at the brownstone, Wolfe settled into his chair with the satisfaction of a man who had once again proved that human beings are lazier than murder, and therefore easier to catch. Archie stood by the desk, turning the silver toothpick case in his fingers. The orchids gave off their expensive silence. Outside, the city dragged another wet evening behind it like a coat. "It still gets me," I said. "All that planning for something so small." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Most murders are small. Archie, only the corpse is large." That was the sort of remark he could toss off while reaching for beer, and it would sit in the room afterward like a magistrate. Fritz had served dinner an hour earlier and had retired in the conviction that feeding Wolfe properly was the only known answer to crime, politics, and poor weather. The office was warm, orderly, and faintly fragrant with cigar smoke, old paper, and the orchids from upstairs, which had the decency to cost more than most people's opinions. On my desk lay the final working notes of the Belrose case, stacked and squared, because when Wolfe solves a murder he likes the facts neat even if the people were not. The silver toothpick case turned in my fingers with a soft glint every time it caught the lamplight. 2 slim grooves inside, one clean, one once fatal. That was all. A man may live 58 years, build a business, run a household like a private monarchy, and come to his finish on a polished sliver of metal no longer than a finger joint. Wolfe watched me. "You are sentimental." Number just irritated. A heart-shaped box, a black ribbon, all that maneuvering, and the real weapon could have fit in a waistcoat pocket. Indeed. He shifted, which on his scale was equivalent to pacing. "The great majority of murders are neither grand nor original. What distinguishes them is not imagination, but the murderer's estimate of other people's laziness." "You mean the police?" "I mean everyone. The police first, perhaps, because they are compelled to labor under practical burdens. But families also, doctors, servants, friends. They all seize the most visible object and cling to it. In this instance, a heart-shaped chocolate box offered itself as a perfect idiot solution." I grinned. "You're hard on idiots." "I find they encourage me." I took the case to his desk and set it down. "All right, one last recital for the cheap seats." He grunted, but his eyes half closed, which meant yes. So I gave it. A harmless heart-shaped box, an empty purchase dressed up in silver paper and black satin ribbon. A counterfeit of romance, selected not by a lover, but by a woman who wanted the appearance of sentiment without the excess of it. The box goes to the Belrose house because whoever sent it knows the first rule. Lydia Belrose opens ceremonial gifts first. Always no need to guess, no need to improvise. The house itself supplies the choreography. Lydia opens the box. Others take pieces, The room, by doing what it always does, declares the sweets safe. Arthur Belro, too cautious to eat first and too gluttonous not to eat once caution has been publicly satisfied. Helps himself, perhaps once, perhaps twice. The exact number finally mattered less than the habit beneath it. He likes nuts because they are easy to pick out by sight. He likes not to ask questions when choice can masquerade as ease. He likes, above all, to remain master of his own little prerogatives. After dinner he goes to the library. He takes his whiskey. He enjoys his privacy. And then comes the private ritual. No one thought to put in lights because it was too ordinary to shine. After sweets, after wine, after dining at all, Arthur Belro uses one of the polished metal toothpicks from his silver case. No poisoned candy, no tampered wrapper, no powder in the folds of silver paper, no grand theatrical device, except the one already furnished by family life itself. The box was bait. The household custom made it persuasive. The toothpick did the work. When I finished, Wolfe nodded once, minimally. Yes. I said, the murderer trusted tradition more than poison. Of course, Wolfe said. Poison is chemistry, tradition is certainty. That was the center of it, and would remain so after the particulars had gone stale. Aconitine could fail. Amounts could be misjudged. Laboratory men could dispute residue and timing. But Lydia Belro would open the gift. Arthur Belro would wait until others had sampled safety for him. Arthur Belro would use the right-hand toothpick first. Miriam Belro had built her murder on those certainties, because they belonged not to science, which can surprise you, but to habit, which rarely does. I moved to the window and looked out. West 35th Street was wet again. The street lamps turning rain into falling wire. Taxis skimmed by in yellow blurs, and somewhere a horn made a complaint that nobody intended to answer. New York keeps moving no matter how neatly a murder is explained. That is one of its better qualities. Behind me, Wolfe said, "Sit down, Archie. You are making the room nervous." I sat. "What still troubles you?" he asked. That surprised me a little. Usually when Wolfe has solved a case, he considers what remains to trouble other people a matter beneath official notice. "The size of it," I said. "Not the method, the grievance. 10 years of living under a man, and it all comes down to a ribbon and a toothpick." Wolfe's lips moved. "You disappoint me. That is one of our household customs." He ignored it. It did not come down to a ribbon and a toothpick. It came down to dependence. The ribbon and the toothpick were instruments. The true mechanism was Arthur Belro's insistence on arranging the lives around him as extensions of his preference. Meaning Miriam didn't just hate him. She had been trained by him. In a sense, he ruled by ritual, correction, and allowance. She murdered by ritual, correction, and allowance. It is not unusual. Oppression has pedagogical value. You make family life sound educational. It often is unhappily. I considered that. And Lydia. What of her? She looked relieved. Of course, she was relieved. Murder had come through the house, but the house itself, its proprieties, its appearances, its hierarchy, had not been publicly disgraced as incompetent. The poison was not in the chocolates she opened. The ritual was not faulty. Only the person exploiting it was. For a woman like Lydia Belro, that distinction matters. And Nora. She wept for several things at once. Her father, certainly her aunt perhaps, but also for the discovery that indignation can ripen into homicide under the same roof where one takes tea. That sounds almost tender, number merely accurate. And Evan, Wolfe gave a small shrug. The son has been offered the unattractive privilege of seeing himself in the family mirror, while it still contains another face. Whether he profits by that is his concern. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. You know, if Miriam had kept her mouth shut better, this one might have taken longer. Yes, maybe much longer. Possibly. But you'd still have got there. He opened his eyes fully then, which is as close as Nero Wolfe comes to vanity without speaking Latin, naturally. I let that pass, because it was true often enough to earn its own furniture. The telephone rang. I picked it up. It was Kramer. Well, I said. He grunted. She's signed a statement. That must have cost her. It cost me listening to it. A pause. Wolfe there. He contaminates the premises as usual. Kramer snorted. Tell him the district attorney says the case is clean. I relayed it. Wolfe said, without taking the phone. Inform Inspector Kramer that cleanliness, while admirable, is not the highest available standard. I gave Kramer the softened version, because there are times when diplomacy is simply accurate translation. He growled. Go to hell, and hung up. I replaced the receiver. He sends flowers. Foo. For a while we said nothing. Wolfe looked at the toothpick case. I looked at the rain. From upstairs there drifted, almost imperceptibly, the moist, rich scent of the orchid rooms where Wolfe's treasures lived in better discipline than most human beings ever manage. The city outside kept dragging its wet evening along, stubborn as a creditor. Somewhere on East 63rd Street, servants would be clearing up the remains of a household performance that had run too long. Somewhere a silver ribbon would lie in the trash. Somewhere an empty heart, shaped box, stripped of chocolates and deceit alike, would have finished saying exactly what it came to say. I got up at last and carried the toothpick case to the cabinet, where case objects waited to be returned, filed, or forgotten. My hand paused on it. Funny, I said. What is? All that uproar over the last piece in the box, and it wasn't even in the box. Wolfe's eyes closed again. Archie, yes? You are approaching philosophy. Stop while there is still time. That ended it, which was proper. Cases should end cleanly when they can. And this one had, as cleanly as murder ever permits. A harmless heart, shaped box had arrived at a respectable house and set custom in motion. A man too, governed by his habits to mistrust them, had followed the script prepared for him. A woman who believed herself wronged beyond endurance had wrapped her grievance in good taste and called it justice. Nero Wolfe had taken the wrapping off. Outside, the rain fell on the brownstone windows and the streetlights turned it to silver wire. Inside, the orchids kept their counsel, the files waited, and the city, having lost one more secret, went on making others. That too is a custom.